is up, everybody? It's the Vish Kumaran show. It's the Pig in a Pickle Larry Krueger show. It's Last Second Sports. We've got a giant mashup of different shows coming to you here today, all from three different time zones. I'm representing the Central Time Zone. Jesse's out there in the East Coast holding down the fort late at night for us. And then we got Larry Krueger being good old lazy Larry at 7 o'clock right at dinner time. And instead of eating pig in a pickle, the man's out here streaming and talking about the 49ers. What's up, guys?
What is up? Good to see you guys. Two of my favorite guys. And man, we're going to chop it up and talk some ball. And Jesse's back from Costa Rica and camp's a couple weeks off. And man, it is on.
Jesse, yeah, most definitely. The tan is looking pretty good. I'm assuming there was a lot of hours spent under the sun in Costa Rica. We were talking backstage and you were telling us a little bit about your trip, but tan sharp.
It was fantastic. Costa Rica is beautiful. Highly recommend it. Larry and I were talking, if you go to Costa Rica, you have to zip line. And yeah, I came back with a little bit of a tan, which, I mean, Florida's got beautiful weather. So for me to get tan going somewhere else, it tells you how beautiful it was there as well. Highly recommend it.
Krug, what about you? You had a little bit of a Mike TV situation going on earlier. If people don't know, I'm going to, open the lens behind the scenes to backstage Larry Krueger. He was fiddling with his camera all pre-show. He was kind of, squished into the screen in the 420p. He looked like Mike TV after Mike TV comes out of the elastic pulling thing in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. What was going on there?
Yeah, seriously. There's just a lot of buttons and switches. No, I was in the wrong. I was at 420, and I think I wanted to be at 480, and I wanted to be at 720, something like that. But we hooked it up, and I got my Niner flags all going in the background. So I'm feeling good, though. When I talk Warriors or Giants or non-Niners, people are like, dude, can we get a little Warrior signage? Can we get a little Giant signage? I'm like, well, no, the flags are kind of permanent. So there you go. But yeah, feeling good and getting ready to talk a little ball. And I've been doing it, I've come off of two of the most successful months that the channel's ever had. I can only wait. I can only anticipate what July and August are going to be, man. I'm fired up.
Oh, I can only imagine. I will say this, speaking of backgrounds, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show, this is the last show that I will be doing in this apartment. I'm actually moving. I'm moving back to the city of Chicago. I'm moving out of the suburbs. So I'm moving on Monday. This is the last show that you will get the beautiful pearly white background with the weird door that's actually the door to my furnace that everybody thinks is my front door, that I just have my desk right in front of my front door. So
that's what I thought. I thought it was your front door. It
looks like a front door, dude.
Everybody thinks it's the front door because of the door handle. Funnily enough, every door handle in my apartment is that way. But everybody sees that door and they're like, dude, why do you stream in front of your front door? That's so weird, man. I'm like, yeah, I just choose to do that. I will say I'm the psycho that chooses not to put furniture up. So hopefully the new apartment will have a setup with a view. So people won't just have to see me with the black or the white background. Excuse me.
And paint the walls or something, Vish. I mean, come on,
a poster, something.
A poster, come on.
Send you an old 70s Farrah Fawcett poster. You can look her up. She was hot back in the day.
Did you see the thumbnail to this video on my channel, Larry?
No. I'll check it out.
I found an old picture of you wearing a tight half-sleeve Warrior jersey.
Oh, look at that!
Yeah, it's one of those throwback sleeves jerseys.
Every time I rip somebody and say somebody's out of shape, somebody sends me that picture. Well, the Warriors sent me this jersey, right? And when I took it out of the box, it was like this thin and then the shoulders, right? And I'm like, what the hell's this? And it was a super, super tight jersey. And we were doing a show on television and radio. And so during the commercial, I'm like, I'm putting this thing on. I come out, I look like sausage casing. I mean, it's just the worst. And so not only that, the guys at the radio station made it into like a poster and put it into the studio. So I'm staring at that thing. So anytime in the last decade, guys, where I've said, this guy's out of shape, that guy's out of shape, here comes, boom, somebody sends me this. Oh, you think that guy's out of shape? Look at this guy. Thanks. Now you recreate it for a thumbnail. Damn you, Vish.
If somebody creates that into a poster, I will put it on my wall. I will stream to the over. I will stream to your oversight every time I stream. We stream together most of the time anyway. So
at least you put it in the corner.
I had to make you even size with Jesse, and I had to crop Grant out of Jesse's photo. So
I even retweeted it. Oh my god. Great.
I love the sausage casing reference. That was really good. It gave me a good visual.
It's just so bad. I mean, seriously, it's all you got to do. I mean, seriously, I didn't even think about it too. It's like if I Google my name, there's like 20 pictures that come up because we did the show on television. But that's one of them that comes up. I'm gonna die, and that's gonna be like on the paper, on the front of some newspaper. My family's gonna see me in a jersey that's like size extra small.
I Googled Larry Krueger, not expecting that to show up. I'll tell you that. So it was a very pleasant surprise today. Before we get started with the show, Mike Monahan. Excuse me. Mike Monahan. Thank you, Larry. Did make a very good point. I am trying to get the deposit money back. So he is right about that. I'm getting my security deposit back. Look at those walls. Look at those walls. Look at those walls. They are as white as ever. Don't pause.
I mean, you could be in a minimum security prison for all we know.
That's what people say. I'll blink twice. I'm okay. This is my apartment. I promise. All right. So I titled this show, and frankly, I don't know what you titled this show, Larry. So this could be a show that has many different titles. But I titled this show, Do the 49ers Need an Elite Quarterback? And I put a picture up of Brock Purdy, Trey Lance. Probably should have put Darnold in there too, right? The idea is that the Niners have this young, cheap, high-potential quarterback room. And we're going to talk about whether one of those guys needs to be elite. Now, the reason I brought this topic up, and I don't know if you guys were aware, there was this debate going on Twitter yesterday, and it was about a play somebody posted from Trevor Lawrence. Did you guys see it?
I did not.
I'm no longer on Twitter, Vish. So no.
Whoa.
That's right. Jesse pulled out of Twitter.
What happened?
I'm ready to focus it. The thing about Twitter for me is it was a way to get my name out there and kind of get recognized. And I think it's done that. And to this point, this upcoming season, I only have so much time. So I got to go all in on YouTube. So I'm doubling down on YouTube and just seeing what it does for me.
I think it's smart.
I think it's smart. Respect that. Grant
said to me a long time ago, he said, hey, look, if you really have something passionate you want to tweet, make a video about it, put it on YouTube. And he's totally right.
Yeah,
he's totally right.
Absolutely.
All right, Krueger, you ready for some technology?
Yeah.
I'm about to share my screen.
Oh God.
And
take the overlay off. Take the overlay off. Otherwise it's gonna squish us.
Look at this, guys. Look at this. This is a highly produced show. I'm not producing this show in the background. Pay no attention to my slightly leaned over head over the mic. I'm just leaning over there for some aesthetics. We have a producer behind the scenes. All right.
Oh,
do you guys see my screen?
Oh,
I can see it. Yes.
All right. So here's the play. Okay. I'm not going to get into the play that much. It's the Yankee concept. Yankee concept is usually a big post with a deep crosser. You usually want to run this versus any single high coverage. The Titans are playing cover 3 here, so he's going to bail to a third. This is the post safety. He's going to bail to a third. Okay, pretty simple. I'm not going to get so much into what Lawrence is doing here, though it's pretty important. This is an absolute seed, right? He drops this on a dime to Zay Flowers, right? Zay Flowers drops this ball. It's one of the worst drops of the season because this is an absolute seed. Let's just watch it from the end zone view and admire it. Look at him reset his feet because of the pressure and just rip this on half a hitch, right? Unbelievable throw. The throw is silly, but so the conversation was really about wrong read by Trevor Lawrence here. Oh my God, what a throw. And the conversation was, well, in the Yankee concept, you should throw it to this crosser right here, right? He's butt naked, wide open. And I actually disagree with that. I'm going to tell you why I disagree with that, but I'm more so going to tell you why from this play, to me, it shows elite process from Trevor Lawrence. And one of the conversations we have had throughout this offseason is this question of Brock Purdy's ceiling. And funnily enough, I have, one of the biggest advocates of Brock Purdy having an elite ceiling. And then I have Jesse, who is high on Brock Purdy, but has also been consistent that he's higher on Trey Lance's ceiling. And to me, let me first explain Lawrence's process, and then I'll get to Purdy. So why do I think this is good process, right? Just watch this safety right here, the post safety. He's going to take one false step where he takes a half turn and he peeks on the dig right there. Lawrence, right as he peeks, watch. Lawrence, he peeks, Lawrence hitch, balls out deep, right? It's an unbelievable throw because he throws it over his head, but that half false step from the safety allows him to throw this big post to Zay Flowers.
Yep.
To me, this is great process because really in this concept, right, this crosser is going to be one. So progression-wise, typically, now I don't know, I'm not actually in their offense or meeting room, but typically if you look up the Yankee concept, pure progression, you're going to throw the crosser on one. This post is tagged as basically an alert. So you're peeking on the safety takes one false step downhill, he's peeking on the dig. You want to throw this post, so you want him to fear this, because if you call this concept, a cross and a post and a crosser, that's called versus cover three. I mean, go watch the Seahawks-Niners playoff game. How many times do the 49ers call some variation of a post and a crosser versus cover three, right? So you see that so often, and right here you see this call. The fact that he throws this ball, to me, it changes how you defend it, because now that safety is always having to be honest about worrying about the post. Now, when we get to Brock Purdy, the reason I think this is relevant is we've talked a lot about.
Real quick, are you the play that comes to mind is where he threw it to Ayuk and Ayuk gave up on the play.
So that's one, right? That's one.
They run it a lot, but that's the one that comes to mind where he chose to throw it to the deep post versus the open crosser.
Same thing. Dig versus cover three. Diggs drives down on Debo on the crosser. Debo is butt naked, wide open, right? If he hits Debo just like this, it's probably a touchdown to Christian Kirk, and Ayuk stops running. That's probably a touchdown too. That is, but I think in that particular play, it was pure progression where you read Ayuk 1, Debo 2. It's not tagged as an alert where, hey, you're going to peek at it, but really pure progression, you're going to go to Kirk 1. And I think that variation is different because rarely do we see the Niners quarterbacks throw a tagged alert. Now, the play I'm going to is actually versus the Bucs. Cover 0, he throws the tag alert on the go ball to Christian McCaffrey for, I think, like a 40-yard touchdown. He absolutely just rips it. It's a great decision, great throw. Really, the process of the decision, right? The throw from Lawrence was silly, but the process that goes into, he saw the safety drop and he didn't hesitate. Immediately was half a hitch, ball was out. That same process I have seen from Purdy before. I know this was a long point, but overall, when I realized what I was watching when I was watching Lawrence is not so much that, hey, I think Purdy is going to become elite, but I'm now seeing the avenue and the vision. Well, if Purdy can do that, where he's playing that fast, that far ahead, where he's not hesitating, which I do think he has the capability of doing that. Maybe there is an avenue for this 7th-round rookie quarterback or 7th-round pick quarterback to also become elite. Larry, I know you're just chomping at the bit to get started on this because you've been screaming this over and over again.
I mean, beyond Purdy, if you go back to the Lawrence play, I think, we're not getting a close-up right there, but, he can tell. And I'm sure he could feel the pressure coming from his face.
Right.
Otherwise, the crosser was the guy to go to. The crosser was the guy that you could have thrown open. There was no other top. There was no defender on top of the crosser. The crosser, you could have led him to the sideline. You had all kinds of room there. I think he knew that crosser, he was going to have to hold it for a half second longer. He didn't have a half second to play with. So he threw it into essentially almost like a man who was double covered in the middle of the field. Now he put it in perfect position, so it just was an incompletion. But if that ball's not perfectly thrown, and it's a difficult throw because you're drifting to your left and you're trying to throw it over the shoulder of your receiver going down the middle with two defenders closing in, to me it seemed like, just looking at that he made that throw because of the pressure, not because he chose that. Not because of the safety. Because I think
disagree.
The open receiver was the crosser.
because look at how he has to reset, right? If he's throwing that ball almost 64 yards in the air. Now, Trevor Lawrence's arm is silly, right? We're not here to get started on how good Trevor Lawrence is. Trevor Lawrence is a very, very excellent quarterback. But I think if you look at the way he resets his body when he gets moved off the launch point and where his eyes are, he has to actually reset his hips and almost do a half turn. He maybe moves his body like 45 degrees where he has to reshift his hips and align it to launch it, right? And that movement, he does it so quickly because he's a pretty special player in terms of being able to reset his feet and throw, and he can throw like that. But I think the crosser where his body is positioned is actually the easier throw. So to me, that decision was solely based on the safety. And it's more about the process for me, Larry, not to disagree with you and not to totally overtalk here, Jesse, but it's that process that leads him to that, right? He sees the safety, and even though you know that the crosser's open, 99% of quarterbacks are capable of hitting the crosser. Very few quarterbacks have the capacity to process in that moment to see, hey, the safety's half a yard off his spot. Post safety took a false step forward instead of getting his spot to the post. I'm throwing this one. What happens next time, do you think, when they come up in 21 personnel condensed? Do you think that safety, if they're in 3 deep, that post safety is going to bite down on play action, or do you think he's running his ass straight to the far hash into the post next play? And so I think the fact that he did that and he didn't hesitate, to me, that's the process that's like beyond. Those are the little plays that are the small margin elite quarterbacks make those plays, right? These are the little plays that the average quarterbacks can't make because it's not obvious. It's not right in front of your eyes. It's not like, hey, this is what the play is supposed to do and you can do that. That's rudimentary. That's the average quarterbacks. That's Kirk Cousins, right? That's our average quarterbacks. The guys that take it a step above, sure, they have the silly physical ability to make that throw, but it's also there in just their process and how aggressive they are. And I will say, to Purdy's credit, we saw moments of such process last year. And perhaps I feel like, I don't know, I there are some people maybe too bullish on his ceiling, and there's some people discounting his ceiling. Jesse, that was a lot. You just digested about 14 minutes of information. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think there's something to be said for it. You know, there's a play that comes to mind for me, and I'll just never forget this play. It was the Patriots versus the Colts. And it was an Asante Samuel interception on Peyton Manning, where they disguised cover 2 so well. He turned to run with the outside receiver, and then almost as if he had eyes in the back of his head, fell off that route and undercut a crossing route, I believe it was, underneath him for an interception. And it was like, how did you do that? Like, what was the play call there? And this is what happens in the NFL. You know, in college, you're going to get a lot of base coverages, especially when you're playing in smaller conferences. You're going to get up to the line of scrimmage. You're going to be able to read the coverage, and you basically know that's what it's going to be. In the NFL, it's not necessarily so straightforward. You're going to see one thing. A lot of times it is that, but there are other times where it's something completely different. Safeties roll post coverage. All of a sudden you thought you were going here, but you've got to make a split decision to go there, because if you go to that original read, you're throwing a pick. Cover 1 robber style. Jimmy Garoppolo comes to mind on a regular basis. So there's a lot that you have to be able to process in a short amount of time. And I think, you know, when we talk about elite traits from quarterbacks, I think that's one of the things that potentially is under talked about and might be something that Brock Purdy certainly can grow into. I don't know if he's there yet. You definitely see glimpses of it. And I think he can get there if he's that much of a student of the game and really lives this and breathes it and eats it and does all those things. I think he can get there. And if he can, then a lot of those other ancillary things that we talk about definitely can be overridden a little bit if your processing is elite.
Krueg?
I mean, there's no question. I think New Dawn Red October says Purdy's strength is his processing. Vish is right that that's how he makes up for the arm strength, being small, et cetera, just like Tom Brady. There's no question that you know, Jimmy Garoppolo, since we just saw Jimmy Garoppolo, was a terrible late in the down thrower. And I think we all kind of understood it. If he went to his first read and it wasn't there, it was like, oh my God, what's coming next? It's like, because you knew that now he was off script and he was such an inconsistent decision maker.
Krug, I will give
Purdy's
him this
strength is
credit.
his processing and his off
Oh, sorry,
schedule.
go
No,
ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's Purdy's strength. I
No,
think he actually
absolutely.
gets better late in the down. I felt really good about his ability to find guys. And even that one that Ayuk dropped in the corner, was a
Right.
beautiful dime. But he made 2 touchdown throws to Kittle on similar type plays where he kind of found him, on the backside, going along the back, the back line of the end zone, and he just bought extra time. So I kind of think, and it's funny, there was a number of Iowa State people this week when people were suggesting that Shanahan had developed him. They're like, hey, you know what? He was fully developed here. And
Right.
I kind of agree with those people that Shanahan got a young quarterback that was very, very developed. I'm not saying that he hasn't had a hand in developing him since, but let's not pretend that Brock's here because of, Brian Greasy and Kyle Shanahan. They happen to draft the right guy. I think that is probably their true genius, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well,
Jesse,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to
Sure.
say, I definitely agree with that. I think that Purdy pretty much was who he was. I mean, there's definitely some things he's going to learn for sure. And I think when you have somebody who is as developed as Purdy is, and you throw him into this offense, you're going to see what you saw last year, which is an explosion of really good play, because this offense provides quarterbacks exactly that. The thing I'm going to push back on a little bit is I do think one of his strengths is processing. I don't think Purdy's an elite processor yet. I think, the play that you talked about where he hit Kittle on the back corner of the end zone, he really missed his first read, which was a wide open out to Jennings, I believe.
Right.
And so you
have
do
to throw
see
the
those
flat
things
there.
show up on film where he makes the play, but really the processing was off. And so that's why the play was made. I'm not doubting he can get there. I believe he has the capability to do so. And if he does, it's going to override a lot of things. But when I look at him, I don't say, oh, Purdy's an elite processor at this point in his career. And I wouldn't expect him to be as a rookie either.
I do, because I'm not comparing him to fully developed, third year, fourth year, fifth year quarterbacks. I'm comparing him to the other rookies and how they processed. And that's to me where Brock is really special, is that we compared Brock to Jimmy. Jimmy was having the best year of his career and had finally realized to, throw away the ball and throw it into the ground. And this was Jimmy at his apex. Jimmy's already prepared to be in 3 Super Bowls, 1 as a starter, 2 as a backup. Brock Purdy hadn't played in 3 months. And, he played in August, didn't play in September, October, or November, got thrown into the fire in December as a rookie in a complex offense, an offense where Matt Ryan in year 2 became the MVP of the league. So I just think that you got to compare him processing wise. I hear what you're saying though, Jesse. He was far from an elite processor, but that's just in the grand scheme of quarterback play. If you really cut it down to just rookie quarterback play,
that's
compare
totally
him to Fields, and
Totally
compare
fair.
him to Lawrence and Zach Wilson and Jameis Winston as a rookie and Mariota, I think then you would say, yeah, he's probably closer to elite.
That's totally fair.
I think there's a lot of layers to what you guys said. First, I wanted to address one thing you said, Krug, and I interjected you there, so apologies. But what I did want to mention with Jimmy, and I think this point about Jimmy is essential to the Purdy conversation, because we don't have an example with Purdy without the other, is that Jimmy's process was very different this year once Christian McCaffrey came, right? Like, this was the best I've ever seen Jimmy in terms of being able to evaluate the front side, get to the backside, find your check down. And there's a timeliness, there's a rhythm to it, there's a process to it. And he was able to get to the backside and drop the ball down, right? There were less moments of panicky Jimmy in the pocket. Holy crap. The in cut that I wanted to throw on my first read just got robbed off. Should I just chuck it straight into that defender that I know is there and create a 3-way head-on collision and hope something happens? Maybe I will. Like, we saw a lot less of that outside of the Denver game, right? I will give this to Jimmy's credit, too. While he does struggle in chaos, where Brock Purdy actually seems to succeed, and I think there's a reason for that as well, he did improve in how he handled chaos last year, right? There's a great play right before he gets hurt in the Miami game. One of the best plays I've seen Jimmy Garoppolo make. Gets outside of the pocket, similar zero blitz. They didn't have it set up. He's got Ray McCloud one-on-one on a wheel route. He gets outside of the pocket, rolls to his right, and drops it in the bucket, right? Does anybody remember this play?
Yeah, I do.
Jesse's face. Okay, there we go. A little bit of nod. So, nice play. Play we're not accustomed to seeing from Jimmy Garoppolo. And so, he did improve in that criteria. And so, when it comes to, like, well, in terms of, well, how many right decisions does the quarterback make in that offense and stuff like that, it's hard for me to evaluate Purdy that way, especially when I saw such a difference in how Jimmy was able to get through his reads and get to the backside because they had this backside check down always available. Because, I mean, George Kittle talked about in a recent interview, a lot of their concepts, they just have McCaffrey run a backside isolation route on the back half of it, and they just delay it. And basically the timing opens up where if you don't read the front side concept and you don't like it, just drop it off backside because he wins one-on-one every time. Every time he wins. He's an incredible football player. And so it's tough to evaluate his process because of that. Now, I think there's layers also to the conversation of, well, is Brock a good processor? I think Brock is two things. One, I think Brock is excellent in chaos, and I think that has to do with his time at Iowa State, just like both of you guys mentioned. There's an interview with Sage Rosenfels and Ross Tucker once Brock Purdy starts playing for the 49ers. I think it's after the Miami game. Sage Rosenfels went to Iowa State, played for the Shanahans. Sage says two things in that interview. One, that's pretty important to this. Mike Shanahan loves Brock Purdy, guys. If you guys didn't know, Mike Shanahan loves Brock Purdy. That's what Sage Rosenfels says. And then two, he said because of the way Iowa State's offense was structured, Brock Purdy was allowed to ad-lib a lot. So he got used to being a playmaker, being able to play make, being able to play off schedule. And I think that's important when it comes to the processing conversation, because I don't know if he necessarily has the best process within this offense right now. And that's a conversation he continually has had this offseason. He keeps saying, I need to get better at playing from the pocket, being more efficient from the pocket, making more decisions from the pocket, right? Those are three things. Both things include. One, I think, is movement in the pocket, how he utilized the space within the pocket. At times, he didn't take the space that was there, and he ran outside of the pocket. So for sure, that's one thing that needs to improve. And then the other thing is he left throws that were right there, right away in front of your face, open, throw the ball on the field, because he was used to operating off schedule. But I do think he's a good processor in the sense that he has an understanding for where things are on the football field, and he has a composure and an awareness to be able to calmly dissect what's going on. And I think we see that even in his off schedule, right? We talk a lot about quarterbacks processing within the pocket, and there's a lot to that because you have to process your offense, you have to process your defense, but there's a process outside of the pocket too. And one of my biggest pet peeves, because I just want to throw this pet peeve into this point because I hate it, is that we automatically associate playmaking outside of the pocket with any quarterback that has an athletic archetype, right? I'll give you the classic example I always like to give. Justin Herbert is more of the archetype to play off schedule than Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow plays off schedule 10 times better than Justin Herbert. He has a better knack for it. He has a better feel for it. He has more arm angles, better knack for manipulating his body. Justin Herbert is more of your conventional mechanical. He likes to play within the offense on time and on schedule. But you wouldn't think that when you look at the archetypes, right? Justin Herbert gets immediately, well, he can play off schedule. Well, Joe Burrow has to play on time. Purdy, to me, is the great example of that. He has the poise, the processing, the decision-making. Now, I think his size reduces the sustenance of his ability to be able to play off schedule so much, and that's where we hope he takes strides within the offense through the course of this year. But he has a natural process to me in terms of his ability to make plays outside of structure. It's a very natural thing. It does show good process. All in all, I agree with both of you. Wanted to emphasize what I agreed with in both your points. But I think that it's a very layered conversation, and I'm kind of excited to see how this offseason affects the entire setup with his development, right? Because what's George Kittle's favorite line that I like to quote? Can't train when you rehab. And I wonder if, as optimistic as everybody seems to be about this return, I still wonder, hey, like, are we going to be able to see him take these strides that we are all expecting him to take so naturally? Because he just seems like the guy that would take those strides. Are we being fair in expecting those from him this offseason?
To me, it comes down to third down, right? It's a third down sport. Third down's the quarterback down. Jimmy played really well last year. I thought the best he had played in a while. You go back to the back-to-back games these guys played. Niners, Saints at home. Saints had a good defense. Niners converted on third down 38% of the time with Jimmy Garoppolo at home against the Saints. The very next week, Brock Purdy, who had not played in 3 months, didn't know he was going to play, probably didn't take any number one snaps probably all week in preparation for Miami, completed, or they converted 42% on third down. So, I mean, granted, I'm just pulling one stat from 2 games, but those are the 2 games that were closest as far as the same team within 2 weeks, different quarterback, the veteran who, knew the offense like the back of his hand, been in the offense for years, converted 38% on third down, and the rookie who had never played 42%. And then the rookie who never played went on and continued to win games, and they averaged 33 points a game. So I just think that your Kittle's right, but now you've got, I asked Brock, on the podium whenever we had a chance to talk to him after one of the mini camps, I said, compare where you're at this year to where you were at last year at this time. He's like, oh, night and day. Last year, I was just trying to walk to the line of scrimmage and remember the play, remember the formation, and just the dizzying array of possibilities that come off of each play and each formation. It's like he was just in the memorization mode. Now he knows it. Now it's about nuance, and to me, it's like, so the idea that he's going to be better in that category, you'd say, oh, for sure he's going to be better.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
then the elbow, if he's lost velocity on the ball, and if he's only throwing 45 miles an hour and he's beneath the league average, and he's lost 10 miles an hour off the fastball, then that works negatively, right? So as soon as we see how much juice he has on the football, if he has the same kind of ball speed, let's just call it that, ball velocity as he had last year, I think there's every reason to believe that even despite the inactivity, he's going to make huge steps forward growth-wise, just because of the time spent, mental reps in this complex offense. Where it gets kind of complicated is if he lost something, if his arm is diminished, and who knows? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would think, it makes sense to me that if you have surgery on your elbow, that you probably don't get it all back. But who knows? It's modern medicine. We used to think that guys tore an Achilles and they were done. Now guys tear Achilles and they're like back at it. Ronnie Bell, I was told, tore his ACL junior year at Michigan. Senior year, I don't even think he wore a sleeve, and he had his best year ever. So, we're in a different era of modern medicine, and just like there is the possibility in every one of these injuries that you could not just come back, but you could come back and almost not be diminished. That was a foreign concept, 10, 15 years ago? So to me, it's like you got to balance all those things. And when you really factor in that, we don't know if he's going to improve dramatically, be roughly the same, or be worse. We literally have to wait until we see it out on the field in a game situation with live bullets before we can honestly say, you know what, he's better than he was last year, or he's diminished from last year, or something in between, right?
Jesse, before I go to you, we have a comment also directed to you, so I want to read that and then get to you. Okay. And I do want to continue on this topic, so let's stay here, because I have a point that has little to do with his recovery, whether he loses arm speed or anything like that, but it's a concern for me just based on the injury and the recovery. First, shout out to my man, the coach. Is he not the biggest content creator in the game these days? Like, come on, coach. Shout out to you. Really appreciate that. Look at that. And then Green Glassful. Man gave Larry $2 just so that he can come on here and yell at Jesse. So, Jesse, you can respond to Green Glassful, and then the floor is yours, my friend.
I don't think I really have to. I could let Larry, who's the biggest Purdy guy maybe known to man, tell you that he's also doesn't think that Trey Lance is bad either. So I think to make such sweeping judgments on players after such short amount of times will always get you in trouble when you're evaluating. And I think that's where a lot of people got in trouble with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that's where a lot of people got in trouble with Baker Mayfield. I think that's where a lot of people got in trouble, with guys like Stafford. The list goes on and on and on. Good or bad, these things can change significantly year 3, year 4, year 5. So I just think making those judgments, you're going to be wrong. I'm not saying that you're always going to be wrong, but you're going to be wrong more often than you're right if that's how you're going to judge people, is based off of a small sample size. What I was going to say about Brock Purdy is I think Larry's right. There's no way to fully know how he's going to be impacted. I think one thing that we can all agree on, though, if we were laying out a path to Purdy being the most successful quarterback he could be in year 2, the injury and the recovery would not be a part of that. Like, if we could remove that injury and recovery, then we would feel a lot better. We would know. We would have an expectation. I think let's remove Trey Lance from the equation, right? Let's act like he doesn't even exist. Mm-hmm. Assuming Brock Purdy is the quarterback for the 49ers and is going to be the quarterback long-term for the 49ers, year 2, if he didn't have an injury, I think we could reasonably have expectations. I think with this injury, I'm not saying he's going to flatline, be worse, be better, because we don't know, to Larry's point. But I think having these sweeping expectations of, hey, I think he's going to get better, or he should get better, I think that's unfair to Brock Purdy, because it is a lot. This is his first true offseason. He still is just a second-year player. Now he's having to deal with a major injury. Regardless of how quickly he recovers or what have you, his offseason was taken completely away from him. And I think it's really hard to put an expectation on him and have him live up to that, especially very early on in the season.
Okay, I agree with that. And I want to shift it to a slightly parallel but different point. But before I do, Larry, do you want to rebut to that? Do you have anything to go off of that, or you're kind of good where that is?
No, I agree with everything you just said. I mean, I personally, I really think there's part of this. Both these quarterbacks have been done a huge disservice, guys. They've both been done a huge disservice. Brock Purdy is not your typical rookie. Trey's being compared to a guy who played a ton of football and could almost probably coach the position at this point. Trey's played 1 year of high school, but to speak in definitives about such young players, one coming off a major injury, or both coming off major injuries, one coming off a major elbow injury, the other's coming off a major ankle injury. I'll say this. You guys know I'm a big fan of Brock and feel like there's no doubt he should start this year. But I don't know what Trey Lance is. I think when the Niners say we haven't changed our thoughts on Trey Lance, I think they kind of knew he was a raw prospect and still know that he's a raw prospect. But all the traits that they loved about him and caused them to draft him, they still love those traits about him. So, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I know the fans get into the either or my guy, this guy, I'm a Trey guy, I'm a Brock guy, it's really, if you really think about it, if you're ripping Trey, you're ripping a guy who is just getting started and is super raw with great traits. And so you have a real potential to look bad on the back end because he's getting better and he was going to continue to get better. And just because it may not be at the speed that you want or may not be in time to be the starter week 1 at Heinz Field doesn't mean that this guy's sentenced to some, he's horrendous quarterback, draft, bust or whatever you want to call him. And then on the other end, if you're ripping Brock Purdy, man, you got to check yourself. This guy's done nothing but play incredible football. And yeah, he might fall on his face, but I'm going to wait till it actually happens before I'm going to predict it to happen. So I don't know. Maybe that's a Pollyannish soft way of looking at it, but I look at
you, Pollyannish.
Well,
Whoa.
I look at two young quarterbacks that I actually think, and Jesse and I threw this to Jesse on our last live stream. I said, if you had to bet everything you had, would you bet that they're neither franchise quarterbacks or both? And he went the safer route, which is neither, because franchise quarterbacks are rare. But I went on the other side of that. I kind of think they're both franchise quarterbacks. I'll stay with that evaluation. I think what we saw from Brock is real. I think what we've seen from Trey as a person is real. But you've got one guy who's so raw and one guy who's so relatively developed. So we have when we're watching Brock, he doesn't have as much growth coming as what Trey does, but he doesn't have as much growth needed, where Trey's got a lot of growth that's coming. So if you're ripping or speaking in definitive terms about either guy and you're negative, I think you're missing it. I think you're missing out. I think you're going to wind up backpedaling off that stance. I really do.
I will say I'm shocked, Jesse. I'm actually not even shocked. I'm disappointed in Jesse for saying neither. I neither is always my answer to that question, as Jesse knows. Larry, you know that too. But I expected better.
And that's logical, right? Because you guys are playing the odds. The odds logical, say neither.
But I need Jesse to be Mr. Like, I need Jesse's, like, unrelenting positivity about Trey Lance. Like, I need that in my life constantly. I need that from Jesse, Ryan. I need that. And then I need your unrelenting positivity about Purdy, because sometimes I feel like I'm just the negative Nelly about them both. But circling back to Purdy, what I did want to mention, for me, it's less about when we were talking about the injury. Sure, like I've beat the dead horse about, well, you know, this injury, we haven't seen other people come back. We had all of this. Okay, fine. The guy is going through it. We will see what he is as a finished product. For me, it's about something, and I'm glad because we got some very informative quotes from the quarterbacks this offseason. And so I'm going to use those to try and explain here what really concerns me, right? This offense is extremely precise in terms of how the quarterback plays in it, right? It's Shanahan's baby. Every little detail, there's a reason behind it. There's a reason why they motion. There's a reason why they shift. There's a reason why we blocked the guy's left shoulder and not his right shoulder, right? There's a rhyme and reason for every little detail in this offense. And the way the quarterback plays in this offense, too, is very detailed because your feet tell you where to go with the ball. And Trey Lance talked about this actually a little bit in terms of his improvement with footwork, because there's a rhythm to how they expect their quarterback to play with their feet in the pocket, right? There's a rhythm. And I've heard quarterbacks who play in this offense always say your feet tell you to go where to go with the ball. Because the idea is that your back foot hits the ground. First hitch, you look at 1, second hitch, you look at 2, and then third hitch, you're out of there. You don't get there, right? The ball has to come out. So there's a timing and rhythm, and everything starts with their feet. That's why they do that drill where they're over the bag, because it's about being able to move your feet in the pocket, but stay in a position where your base is always widespread and you're capable of just shuffling your hips and throwing the ball. Something Jimmy Garoppolo historically has never gotten enough credit for. He threw the ball exceptionally well with people around him, creating space to throw the ball. That did an amazing job. So when there's so much detail and so much precision that goes into an offense, Shanahan has already complained about the lack of reps throughout the offseason and how it affects his offense, right? He always uses this isn't basketball analogy, meaning we can't just come out and scrimmage and keep getting better. Like, there's a process that leads to us practicing, and there's a process that leads to his offense improving over the course of the season, right? What are they always complaining about in the beginning of the year? Well, they came out in fronts that we didn't expect, or, you know, we're not executing. We just got to execute better. And we see that execution improve because the details improve as they get more reps in the offense. Where this brings me to Purdy is that we are talking about a guy, while he's getting every mental rep, and Larry's absolutely right, he's going to be better in that area. Though I've never heard a player say, hey, Krug, guess what, dude? Year 1, I was smoking it. Year 2, I'm sucking right now. No, they always say, well, year 2 is different, man. I'm a different guy. Like, look at me. Like, you know, they always say it. Even I'm pretty sure if we go back, Ambry Thomas might have said, hey, I'm a totally different guy. Ambry Thomas, you were a different guy. You went from a guy starting in the NFC Championship game to a guy who was playing behind Janoris Jenkins. So, yes, you were a totally different guy. That was mean. I'm sorry. That was really mean. But,
I don't know if it was mean. It was accurate.
Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah.
But the point is, they always say they're a different guy. That's my kind of worry. are there going to be enough reps for the guy over the course of that offseason where this timing is very refined and now? Because you can say, hey, Brock didn't get that last year. He was only getting third string reps. But even with that third string reps, there was the daily repetition of, hey, this is what we want to work on. This is where the ball goes. And he was working through that and throwing it. Now, maybe he doesn't need to throw, right? Like maybe he can go through the reps. He can keep his body and mimic being in those positions. And then he said he goes through that violent motion. They called the motion violent to let us know that he's not just, flicking the towel. He's really flicking the towel. So he's apparently throwing that towel with a lot of violence. So maybe that happens. But that's my concern, Larry. And it brings my concern even more when I see a guy like Tom Brady take Danny Amendola and Julian Edelman in May to Montana or Idaho or wherever he goes, and they work on these little things with leverage and timing and stuff like that. And they've played together for how many years, and they still need to work out those slight kinks in chemistry. For me, that chemistry is the one thing I'm a little nervous about with Purdy. And I guess I was surprised by how great it was right away with guys like Kittle and Ayuk and stuff like that. And maybe it's so innate for him. It's like Jimmy and Emmanuel Sanders. He's just got an innate chemistry with all of these guys. Perhaps that's the case too. I don't want to rule that out. But that is what has me worried. It's less at this point about, hey, his arm, is he going to be throwing it? Is it going to be the same power? Is he going to have the same details and the timing? Or all of those things going to be there? Or is he going to take 3 weeks where he's got to find that timing and rhythm? Because the big difference for the 49ers this year to me is that I think there's an urgency and an understanding that the last 2 years, their biggest issue is that they've put too much on the back half of the season. And they go on these long streaks and they kind of just burn themselves out. The attrition of the football season, they don't get the 1 seed, they don't get the bye, and they just get tired and grind it out over the course of the year. Not as much last year because they had that home schedule, but definitely in 2021, they got grinded out through the back half of the year. So with starting fast being urgent, that's my long diatribe about why I'm concerned about Brock Purdy. The timing. What do you think, Krug?
Well, I think it's fair. I was at minicamp. I felt like Trey Lance, there's a lot of people, and now granted, we saw 20% of it, right? There was, if there was 5 practices, we got 1. So who knows what happened in the other 4. But in the practices that I saw, I felt like Trey Lance was equal to or slightly better than Sam Darnold. But there was also another built-in excuse there is that Trey has thrown to Ayuk. Trey has thrown to Debo and Jennings and Gray, and he knows these receivers. He knows their habits, their speed, how they break out of certain routes, so on and so forth, where Darnold did not. But nobody ever factored that in when we were talking about it, and nobody really cares, right? I mean, those are nuances that are like, yeah, so what? It doesn't matter. But it actually matters a ton.
Right.
And that's why they have throwing camps in the offseason, and that's why they, that's what you really want to see is you want your quarterback to get on the same page as your receivers. And it's like, it doesn't matter if they're both wrong. It just matters that they're on the same page. It doesn't matter if they're on the wrong page. If they're both on the wrong page, it's all right. So that's the advantage that the incumbent quarterbacks have. So I kind of felt like Darnold was at a little bit of a disadvantage. So was Brandon Allen. And we're evaluating this like, oh, these guys are neck and neck. And maybe they are, but that was the advantage Trey had on Darnold. As far as Brock and the reps, Brock got live reps last year, and Darnold didn't have live reps in this offense, and Allen didn't, and Trey didn't really. I mean, he had a few at the beginning of the year. So I still think, even though I agree with you that live reps would help Brock be that much more in tune, I think he's probably more in tune than the other guys, because he's had the most live reps of any of these 4 quarterbacks with these receivers for the longest period of time.
I think regardless of quarterback, the team, you pointed it out, the team just starts slow innately. That's what it is. And I think when I talked about this season and what's going to be most important, that's one of the things that I brought up, which was I think the 49ers, if they want to win a Super Bowl, they have to get the number 1 seed. They have to find a way to get the number 1 seed. And that means they can't start out slow. That bye week's going to be so important going into the playoffs. And we see how it can benefit a team. And I think the 49ers would benefit greatly from it. However, I think regardless of the quarterback, they could lose to Pittsburgh. I think that's a possibility. And I think you could really look at it and say, okay, well, listen, let's say Trey Lance starts. Well, Trey Lance doesn't necessarily have the confidence of the team. He's still working. I mean, he's basically hasn't even played his rookie 16 games yet. He's still working through things. Brock Purdy, although he has the confidence of the team and he came off the bench and played extremely elite last year for a period of time, he's coming off of an offseason where he hasn't had a lot of those reps. And so you could see either way the team starting slow. And then obviously if Sam starts, well, we know that he's new to the team in total. So no matter what, you could see a scenario where they potentially lose game one. That's why I think it's so important that whoever the 49ers choose at quarterback, and it sounds like it's going to be Brock Purdy as long as he's healthy, that we as fans and obviously the team, and I think the team is probably more apt to do this than we are as fans, regardless of how it looks early, we have to be willing to play through those growing pains and see it through, because that is not necessarily what it's going to look like later in the season. And that's something that the 49ers are now talking about. They were willing to do last year with Trey Lance. This year, they're not willing to do those same things. And I think it's important for a quarterback's growth that you are willing to see it through, whether it's Trey Lance or Brock Purdy. I think they both deserve that grace.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's a perfect segue, because I think you brought up a really important point that I don't know if enough people are focusing on, right? The importance of the 1 seed. I think that there's been an increased importance in the 1 seed across the NFL. This was going to be, well, actually, this was my big take in 2021. And then both 1 seeds shat the bed. And, Green Bay lost in that, actually not stupid, very thankfully lost in that game. And then Kansas City blew that lead to Cincinnati, and 2-3 seeds went to the playoffs. But with the 17 games and with only one team getting the bye, I think with the attrition of the NFL season, we're going to see 1 seeds dominate these playoff runs, because that bye and being at home, like that's a double advantage. To me, it should be one or the other. But you know what? If you're the 1 seed over the course of the NFL season, that's big time. So credit to you. And so I think it's such a massive advantage now. It was always an advantage, but I think that advantage is increased now that you're the only team getting the bye and the 17-game schedule. So you have an extra game, more attrition on the body by the time you get to that point in the season. I think it's really, really important. Brings me to my next topic within that. So we've established that getting the 1 seed is important for this football team in terms of our outlook on them winning the Super Bowl next year. The two of you are going to be at training camp in a couple weeks in different capacities. Larry will be going around with his producer, who also is credentialed, by the way. Larry gets his producer credential.
No producer this year. It's just going to be me solo. No producer.
Oh, okay, fine.
Larry
will be going around with his camera, interviewing players and
with his gimbal.
Talking. Right. He's got his mic. He's ready to go. And then Jesse, of course, will have it. Will you have binoculars in the crowd? You be doing
I might need them.
Okay, perfect. So Jesse will have his binoculars and he'll be up on the bleachers and watching it. What do you need to see? We know this is a team that shows up in training camp and competes. The defense is physical. They start fast. They start quickly. What do you want to see from this team in training camp that says to Larry Krueger, this is a different focus, a different urgency. They're not going to come out and start 3-4. They're not going to come out and start 3-5. They're going to have maybe not an 8-0 start to the season, but Larry, you were there in 2019.
Well, it's a great question, because the Rams have been the team that sit everybody in the preseason and give up September for making sure that all their money is on the field by week 1 and not hurt in training camp. The Niners have played it more traditionally. They're putting their guys out there. The only thing I'll say is, if we go back to the Bears game, why did the Niners lose the Bears game? Well, we can point to Trey Lance and this and that, but that to me is not fair. The real reason they lost that game is that Dre Greenlaw had a late hit on 3rd down. I think their mindset was, guys, let's fly around, make plays, and be physical. And unfortunately, playing smart wasn't in that description. And they honed it in and eventually played smarter, but they didn't play very smart that day. And the other thing that happened in that game is there were 2 broken plays on defense. So really, they broke down defensively. They at the inopportune time. They had a couple penalties that extended drives. Can't have that. And they had a couple broken plays, miscommunication. Can't have that. And when you have 4 crucial mistakes in a defensive game, and then you get the final quarter of the game basically like erased from the record because you needed to pass and it wasn't passing conditions, and you got a young quarterback on the road and, a very inexperienced guy and terribly awful conditions to pass. You got to remember the Bears, really were allowed to just run the ball at the end of that game because they had the lead. So it all just kind of worked poorly. But if you say, why did they lose week one? They lost week one because of late hits, dumb penalties, and broken plays. So I would say there's nothing that I need to see in camp. I just need to know that they are honing in very seriously on attention to detail on the minutia, not just sending a message of, we got this studly defense, let's play fast and physical and fly around. That ain't enough. You got to play smart.
Discipline is an awesome thing to bring up, right? Because if you guys before I send it to you, Jesse, just one thing, reminder for everybody. What was the theme of the first 8 games of 2021? All those defensive pass interference penalties, right? The Niners were having an issue with penalties all throughout that season. So that's back-to-back slow starts. And Larry has brought up the point of, hey, discipline has been a theme there. Jesse, what do you need to see at your first training camp? Like, what are you expecting to see? Like, what is Jesse Naylor? If he doesn't see it, he's coming back. He's turning on Last Second Sports, and he's saying, guys, I didn't see it. I'm pissed off. What is going on? What do you need to see?
I would say 2 things. I mean, one, this is my first training camp, so I don't have anything to compare it to. So I'm at a bit of a disadvantage there. But I would say
you need to see guys in Niner helmets and uniforms first and foremost.
Yeah, then I'm good. I'm good to go. That's
training camp.
Yeah, it'll be really weird if I see a bunch of scabs playing football. I would say 2 things. One, health. We need to see health. So can we get through this training camp fully healthy, ready to go? Or do we have a George Kittle missing the first few weeks of the season? So that's number one. Can we get through it healthy? And I hate to go back to the quarterback thing, but I understand that the 49ers have been clear-ish about who their starter was going into the last 2 seasons, but there were a lot of questions regardless of what they wanted to say. We had the whole thing when Trey Lance was drafted and it came out later that he was creeping up on Jimmy Garoppolo. They might go to him week 1, but then the finger injury and he didn't show out the way that they had hoped against the Chargers. And so they decided to go with Jimmy, but really the competition was there, even though he said there wasn't a competition. And then last year, yes, it was Trey Lance's team, but you always had Jimmy Garoppolo looming. And then he ends up signing, and then everybody's got these questions. Well, how long's the leash and whatever. So those questions, even though they seemed on the surface as if they were answered at the quarterback position, they were not. So what I would like to see is a healthy Brock Purdy, and let's just have a clear cut. Hey, this is the quarterback. There are no questions. Let's run through this thing and let's roll. And that way they can build that continuity and go into the season with 0 questions at the most important position in football. Because the last 2 years, I believe when you talk about discipline and all those other things, it's hard to be focused on the minute details when you have the most important position in football up in the air and anybody can win it. So let's have a clear cut, this is our guy, and let's roll with that.
I think one other thing, Vish, I want to see. The Niners have a ton of young players. When you think of guys in either year 1, year 2, or year 3. So what does that tell me? The biggest improvement is typically year 1 to year 2. They got a lot of guys in that category. Drake Jackson, Kalia Davis, Marcelino McCrary-Ball. So I want to get a feeling of overwhelmingness, kind of like 85 Bears. Kind of like 86 Giants. I want to see so much talent on the field and so much depth and so many guys that the arrow's pointing up that collectively the group's going to rise, just because individually there are so many guys that are individually better than what they were a year ago. To me, that if you say, what is my number one hope? I got to hope that this Niner team this year is significantly better than what they were last year, because that's what it's going to take to go by Philly. Philly had a great draft. Philly had a pretty good offseason. It's going to take Drake and 5 to 10 other guys being quite a bit better, where we can say, oh my God, this guy looks way better. That guy looks way better. That guy looks way better. If I see that in like 10, 12 guys like that, then that will make me feel like, you know what? this is on a trajectory to look really, really good.
So I 100% agree with both those points, especially Jesse's about having a definitive answer at quarterback. I think that's essential. I think it's less. I think it's less important who that answer is, and more important to just have one that everybody knows that they're behind. And I think part of the mystery that was allowed with Garoppolo was that at any point you knew that the team was always behind him. And I think that gave equity, even though we weren't sure, the team was always sure. I think when the team isn't exactly sure who they should be behind, I think it creates, a situation of it can create chaos. And the moment things start to go wrong, people will point to that and say, well, the other guy should have played or this should have played. So I think that's a difficult situation. Now, it's funny that I think you guys are bringing up the Eagles. One of the things I actually think going into this season, I don't think the Eagles are going to win the NFC East, excuse me. I don't think the Eagles are the big – I think Dallas wins the NFC East. I think the drafting of Mozzie Smith, getting size to their defensive line, something they didn't have before, getting a true number 2 receiver and a deep threat in Brandon Cooks, who's a terrific player, and then getting Stephon Gilmore. I think those 3 things, along with keeping Dan Quinn, I think Dallas quietly – along with their offensive line, Tyler Smith's going to have a second year. I think Dallas is going to be the better team in the NFC East. I like Washington. If you can promise me that Sam Howell will be half decent, heck, if you could throw Jimmy Garoppolo on Washington right now, I might pick Washington to make the playoffs. I really like that defensive line. I think their defense is very good. I don't know in how many years it's been since a team has won the NFC East back-to-back, right? Dallas won it the year before. Philadelphia, I think, won it the year before that. There's a couple of Giants years in between. Every year there's a different team winning the NFC East. I think Philly falls off this year. I think Dallas is the team to look out for or in the NFC East, but I don't think the biggest contender for the Niners is in the NFC East, by the way. I think this entire thing of losing both coordinators, having all these different Georgia players with kind of shaky stuff happening surrounding them at the University of Georgia, all of this moving parts. I'm not fully there with Jalen Hurts. I saw it. It was great. I'm still not 100% there. I will continue to be just a hair bit of a skeptic. I'm getting less and less bullish. And by the way, before you come on to me, go look at this. I don't get a lot of predictions right, but I said the Philadelphia Eagles last year would be the number 2 seed when nobody thought that they were even a contender in the NFC. Before the season, I said they would be the number 2 seed. So I saw it coming before the year. Last year, and this year I might, see it coming wrong, but I think I don't like it. Lane Johnson coming back on this 1 year, I don't like it. It doesn't spell good to me.
I personally, I think Philly, I mean, roster wise, they're there. They definitely are there. It's hard when you're the hunted, things do change. I think it's totally fair to not be as bullish on Hurts just because I don't know. Over the last few years with quarterbacks, I've really tried to take this 3-year approach. Give me 3 years. Give me 3 years. And that's more like playing 3 years, not just in the league 3 years. There's so much that can happen up, down. Things change so quickly. The league catches up. The league slows down, whatever. I think I need to see. I don't think he's going to have a dramatic fall off, but I could see a fall off for sure. I wouldn't be that shocked. So I like your reasoning. You do think Philadelphia, I would assume, is still probably a playoff team though in the NFC. So the question
roster wise, I have no questions.
Yeah.
I think they're still top to bottom the most talented roster. I just don't think the roster fits together as a team as seamlessly as it did. I think there were way too moving parts for them last offseason. By the way, the last thing I forgot to mention, this new zone read rule is going to fuck with their offense. It's going to fuck with their offense. This new zone read rule where you can't do the forward handoffs anymore. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to fuck with their offense, right? Last year, their entire offense was – look, Jalen Hurts played awesome last year. But for me, it's hard to fully rally behind a quarterback when 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7 turns into a rundown because 4th and 3, they just shove the quarterback 8 yards and it was the stupidest play in football. So it's like how many plays is he really being asked to make? He was a top 10 quarterback. I'm not trying to diminish that. He's an excellent football player, but the margins of, hey, can you carry the team when everything is not working in rhythm and in timing the way it was last year? That's a question I still have, and I think too much went right for Philadelphia last year. By the way, their interior defensive line, they lost Javon Hargrave, and they drafted Jalen Carter. Great. But they had an in-between period last year where Jordan Davis got hurt, and they had to go sign Linval Joseph and Dominic, as Cam Newton calls him, Donkey Kong Sue, off the streets. They had to go sign both of them to come and alleviate issues on their defense. Both of those guys are not available to be signed this offseason. Jordan Davis, when he came back from injury in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl, was terrible. I'm not as bullish on that entire thing.
I do want to say this, though, and you talked about their coordinators. Obviously, I think the world of Steichen. I think he's a hell of a quarterback whisperer, and I think the Richardson pairing at the Colts. We talked about it well before the draft, and how I thought Richardson with Steichen was the recipe for success. I really believe that. They're definitely missing something there. But as far as Gannon goes and that defensive coordinator, that is addition by subtraction. That was the one thing that I said about Philly going into that, and I talked about it with the Philly content creator. I said, your defense is so stacked player to player. The only thing holding them back is your defensive coordinator. I thought he was god-awful. I think he got exposed in the Super Bowl because of it. I don't know how he got a head coaching job, but I do not like what they had there. Anything other than him is going to make that defense better. And there are still players up and down that defense. They are extremely talented. If they can get somebody that can at least put it together schematically, they're going to be better defensively, even if they take a step back offensively. So I'm curious to see how that whole thing plays out.
One last thing before I go to you, Krug. One last personnel thing that people underrated. Last year, the most underrated thing about the Philadelphia Eagles was how good their linebackers played. TJ Edwards and Kazir White played very well last year. Nakobe Dean with knee problems is going to start, and then who do they have? What? Nicholas Morrow? Sean Bradley? Who's going to start next to him? Their linebackers, Kazir White signed for pretty decent money. TJ Edwards signed for pretty decent money. Both those guys heavily underrated on how well they played last year. They played very well. I think they had a couple of pretty bad games in between when Philadelphia struggled to stop the run. And they were definitely aided by having, Captain America and the Avengers as their defensive line. But I think the fact that they lost those linebacker personnel to keep the corner and all, I'm skeptical. Go ahead, Krug. My bad.
Well, I mean, if you're following Philly, supposedly the guy in their camp that's had a great offseason is Christian Ellis, number 53, who's in their linebacker mix, and Ellis is an interesting player. I think that's Luther Ellis's brother. He played at Idaho. He's a pretty good player. I think you're way, way, way overrating Mozzie Smith.
Okay.
Mozzie Smith was on the Bruce Feldman freaks list, and everybody got excited about his physical potential, including Dallas. But he's got short arms. He makes no plays behind the line of scrimmage. The guy had 7 games last year where he had 3 tackles or less. He had 1 sack all last year. In the NFL, you're going to get more zone blocking scheme. Go flip on that film, Iowa against Michigan, and Iowa zone scheme. He couldn't do anything. He was a total non-factor in that game. I
did watch that game.
He's a little bit like a Dontari Poe.
Yes.
He's all show and no go. I don't see this guy. To me, DJ Jones is worlds better than Mozzie Smith, but everybody loves Mozzie because Feldman put him number 1 on the freaks list, and he is a freak. He's incredible strength, but I just don't see it. I mean, I think Dallas, and not only that, I think he's a 2-down guy. I think he's a 2-down run stuffer who's not going to give you much on 3rd down. I know there's been a lot of talk in Dallas about Mozzie. I don't buy it. I really don't. I think he'll help, but this idea that he's like Chris Jones, no, he's not. So I still think Philly's the best team in the conference. I like Philly. I just think Philly, when you look at, Jalen Carter doesn't have to do too much. I really believe Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox are going to get him to fly right. They got a lot of talent up front. Milton Williams, Jordan Davis is going to be better this year.
Better hope Lane Johnson doesn't get hurt, man.
They got a Jomo from Texas.
Doesn't get hurt.
They got Contavious Street. I mean, they've added some bodies. They got they're terrific on the line of scrimmage. And then in the secondary, they added Terrell Edmonds, but then they also drafted what I thought was the best safety in Sidney Brown. So
He is
I
an
think
awesome player. Yes.
I think Philly's got, they lost Miles Sanders, and I think that's a major loss. And we'll see, but
You
one of
like
these
Rashad
years,
Penny or DeAndre Swift?
I'm not a Rashad Penny guy, and I'm not a DeAndre Swift guy. I know they wanted Swift because Swift's a Philly guy, but Swift has been, very inconsistent throughout his career. To me, the best back they have is Gainwell by far. So I don't know, but I still like Philly just because Philly's got Goddard, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and obviously Hurts, two really, really strong offensive linemen, guys are going to be in Canton and Kelsey and Lane Johnson. But, I think Philly might come back to the pack as far as injuries, but they're still the class of that division, in my opinion.
Jesse?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You look at the secondary depth. You talk about guys like, it seemed like every single pick they made, you're like, how did you pull that prospect so late? You talked about Ojomo. He could have been a third, fourth round guy, depending on where you were looking. They got him like round 7, super late. Then you had Ringo slipping, fell right to him. I agree with you. Sidney Brown, best safety in the draft. Every single time they picked, I was like, you got to be kidding me. How did they do it? And I feel like the depth in the pieces leaving on the defensive line was so overrated at the beginning of the offseason. Everybody's like, oh, it's a mass exodus. The defensive line's going to be trash. They still have, I believe, 4 guys on that defensive line that have gone over 10 sacks at some point in their career. It's not like Hargrave was a consistent 10-sack guy year in and year out. He did it one time. It was last year. I could see those guys doing it again.
9.5 the year before.
Right. And you know as well as I do, who's the one guy that I wanted the 49ers to get last offseason that ended up in Philadelphia? And we had a debate back and forth on could he repeat leaving Carolina? That was Hassan Reddick. He absolutely blew up last year. He's in the perfect defensive scheme for him with the weapons around him to just let him go out and make plays. I think he's going to continue to do so.
And he's a little undersized, but they have Nolan Smith now.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
And also Teron Jackson, my buddy, Rick Mueller, Randy Mueller's brother, is the recruiting coordinator at Coastal, and he recruited Teron Jackson, and Jackson's the real deal. And he has, he's going to come of age this year. He's now at that spot where he's ready to take off. So I think Philly's
stop
line's pretty
believing
good.
In the Super Bowl hangover, guys. Like the Super Bowl hangover, we're going to pretend like we're just not going to believe in that one anymore.
I believe it's something. I believe it's something because you're playing, not because of the Super Bowl, but just because you're playing longer. And, it's, to me, it's really Philly's season comes down to the same thing I think the Niners season could come down to. A couple of key offensive linemen must stay healthy. If you lose Trent Williams, you're cooked. If you lose Lane Johnson, you're cooked. That is strong as these teams are. I think they're one inopportune injury away from just being down with everybody else. But I do think Philly's still going to be there.
I think Philly's going to see a lot of different looks this year. I'm interested to see how their offense evolves. But typically when we see coordinator changes go through like this, while we do see ownership from the offense of the new guy, they're trying to recreate what they did the year before often. And usually it doesn't have the same results. I think we'll see different looks, too, on how people defend that RPO game. Like I said, I think the zone read, the new rule is going to fuck with how they do the zone read, but we'll see. That RPO game that they do, though, where, hey, we're going to have the tight end just motion off and sift, and basically we're just going to have him motion across and go to the flat, and we're going to read the zone read. And if you come to Hurts, he's going to dump it to the tight end, and if you stay with the tight end, Hurts is going to run for 7 yards. I think teams are going to have a better plan on how they handled it because that was a wrinkle they added to just the conventional zone read because they basically turned the zone read into an RPO. We'll see. There's a lot of time to debate this one.
I'll tell you one thing that is going to help them, though. They completely unlocked A.J. Brown. As great as A.J. Brown was and we thought he was coming out of Tennessee, they brought him to a whole new gear, unlocked a whole part of his game that a lot of people probably didn't even know existed or forgot had existed after coming out of college. They unlocked that. And that dude is an absolute cheat code in that offense. That's going to be hard to stop.
Oh, yeah. Dominant player. Flav or Flave, still don't know, says, by the way, Flav, you entertained me for one full night on Twitter Spaces. I had absolutely nothing to do. Shout out to you for entertaining me in some pretty thrilling conversation on Mr. Roscoe's Spaces. Shout out to him as well. Thank you, Flav. But he says, reminds me of the people that say, quote unquote, they can't win a Super Bowl with Purdy. ... Not the 11 or not the 3 dots, just ... Least bold take you can have. If Purdy ends up being Dan Marino, this fan base would be like, quote unquote, see, I told you he couldn't do it. But he doesn't end the quote. Sorry, Flav, I had to pick at your grammar a little bit there. But not to be a jerk, what do you guys think of this? Do you guys think that, hey, there's this segment that's just saying, well, if he doesn't win a Super Bowl, then anything he does is good enough? Because I haven't seen conversation like that. I think there's a lot more nuance to that conversation. But I'm going to start off with Larry because I can see Larry's already ready to go.
I mean, the level of stupidity of this is just off the charts. I mean, think about this. There's one team's going to win the Super Bowl. Okay, so you got to probably what's the Niners' chances of winning the Super Bowl in Vegas? Like 11%. So you got an 89. If you're saying that the Niners can't win the Super Bowl, you got a fucking 89% chance of being right. So at the end of the day, what are we talking about? So if you say they can't win a Super Bowl this year with Brock Purdy, you got an 89% chance of being right. Really, so he's right. It is the least bold take you can have. That in a way, it's almost lazy too. It's like, well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons teams win and reasons teams lose. What if Brock Purdy plays awesome, but the Niners lose 5 key defenders and are giving up 38 points a game? So, I mean, there's context that has to be taken into consideration. It's not as simple. In basketball, it could be as simple as, you didn't have Steph Curry. There's 5 guys on the floor. There's 53 guys on the roster. So, you know what? If you're saying, I don't think he can win the Super Bowl, you got an 89% chance of being right. So, I mean, it's not, I mean, if you take anything else and you said, and you had an 89% chance of winning and you made it a statement, people would be like, yeah, so what? I mean, it's a big, what kind of a statement's that? You're bound to be right. And if you're wrong, it's like you should almost get your whatever you're speaking on should be stripped away from you. If you side with the 89% over the 11% and the 11% beats your ass, you should be basically eliminated for communicating in whatever form you communicated in. Because you took the lowest percentage chance and you're like, we made this the barometer that is the end all be all. So I don't have a lot of respect for the crowd of like, well, he's probably not going to win the Super Bowl. They made it to the NFC Championship with a rookie quarterback last year. So, are they going to win the Super Bowl this year? Well, odds are they're not. So is it going to be Brock Purdy's fault? I mean, come on, seriously. Seriously. Jesse. And while we're doing this, we're like then going, well, he lost to the Bears, but it was a monsoon. Now it's like we're creating excuses for convenient narrative. And it's like, come on, it's a team sport. We'll see how it goes. Let's just say that's all I'll say to that.
Jess.
Yeah. I think you can look at this both ways. The way that I see it is I think that Brock Purdy with this roster can win a Super Bowl. But for me, like the questions of what Brock Purdy is or is not going to be aren't necessarily going to be answered with this roster as currently constructed. We're going to have to look into the future. Does he get paid? And if he gets paid and you start stripping pieces away, it's going to take a while before we're fully going to know, in my opinion. But to think he can't win a Super Bowl with this roster and the way he played last year, I think would be pretty damn bold to say it's impossible. Yeah, it may not be likely, but it is definitely possible. But what I would say is, regardless of the chances, the 49ers moved on from Jimmy Garoppolo and drafted Trey Lance because they felt like they couldn't win the Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. regardless of the reason, whether it was injury, what have you. So the guy that you're going with this year, the reason they can't just turn it over to Trey Lance, and they were willing to do so last year, is they were willing to go through the growing pains because they felt like at the end of the season, Trey Lance week 18 would be different than Trey Lance week 1, and maybe they could win with that, and that would be enough. Right. This year, they're unwilling to go through those growing pains because they don't have the time to do so. So the expectation, regardless of the percentage, is that they do win a Super Bowl, and that, fair or not, is the expectation, regardless of who the quarterback is. And they are choosing to not go with Trey Lance if Brock Purdy is healthy because they expect to win the Super Bowl.
Right. Well said, both of you. I will say this also. If Purdy ends up being Dan Marino and the 49ers with this roster, this coach, everything, somehow don't win the Super Bowl there too, start firing everybody, man. There is something like that doesn't make sense in my head of like, if he ends up being Dan Marino and we're still saying that all like there's a scenario that, that doesn't fire
here's
everybody.
One other thing has to be added. To me, I mean, and people, nobody's ever hitting on this, but it's obvious. If the 49ers knew, why did they go with Trey? What's changed in 1 year? Brock Purdy. That's what's changed in 1 year. Last year, they wouldn't have gone forward with Trey and given him that opportunity if they knew that Purdy was going to play the way he played. They didn't know that what they had in Brock Purdy. They can say that they liked him in the draft, and God knows you got to credit them. They're the ones who drafted him. But if they knew that they had a super polished quarterback, they wouldn't have even been all in on Trey Lance last year. The difference between last year and this year is now they have Brock Purdy. Now they know they have a guy that they could lean on that can potentially win. So if Brock Purdy didn't exist, they'd be giving Trey another chance again this year because he would, in their mind, he's the best they got. Now they're looking at Brock going, you know what? Maybe he ain't the best we got. We actually played pretty well with this other guy. I think that's the real difference.
I completely disagree with that. I'm going to touch on Green Glassful, who decided to give $2 this time, not to take a shot at Jesse, but to take a shot at Grant. So he says Grant's videos are pathetic. Thank you, Green Glassful. Had to read it. Not the kindest thing to say. We promote kindness here, but okay, fine. You got your double shot off. Now, I completely disagree with that they would have opened it up for Trey Lance. If that scenario that you described happened and the season tanked with Jimmy Garoppolo getting hurt, right, I think we would be seeing the same exact quarterback competition that we are seeing right now, except both those guys would be competing for the starting job. He is in a competition with Sam Darnold, right? And he is in a competition with Sam Darnold despite Brock Purdy being hurt. They gave him the job the year before. Now he's in a competition with the guy who started 55 games and washed up on 2 different teams. Those two things don't add up if something hasn't changed for the guy. And they also brought back one Jimmy Garoppolo as the little shadow that hangs over Trey Lance's head. And the question I always ask, and it's a massive hypothetical, we can never know the answer and we get there. But if they started 3-4 with that embarrassing Sunday night loss against Denver on national TV, at Denver against Nate Hackett and Russell Wilson, and that embarrassing loss the subsequent week at Atlanta against Marcus Mariota, do you think Trey Lance, after all the palpable tension that existed after they lost week 1 to Chicago, do you think he makes it to week 8 and week 9? Garoppolo was brought back to save their season in that exact scenario. They brought back the guy that they told everybody and their grandmother for 3 straight years, we do not want this guy playing quarterback for us. We'll get anybody else. We want to get rid of this guy. They couldn't get anybody to take this guy. Remember, Shanahan was telling coaches at the owners meeting 2 years ago, that's what they were saying, that, hey, why aren't you guys trading for Jimmy? He's better than the quarterback you have. Do you guys remember that? I remember that. They wanted to get rid of Garoppolo at every capacity. They brought him back. This idea that everything's the same with Trey Lance. Everything's good and dandy. It's just Purdy just showed up and he's so special. That's half the story. Sam Darnold's here for a reason. He's here to compete for this job for a reason. And it's because as much as I think they still like the outlook of Trey Lance, I think they are less optimistic of the process of him reaching that outlook within this roster than they were a year. Now, that's still a massive change, or it's not as much a negative change on Trey Lance as often this is portrayed when we talk about it, but it's still enough of a change because, hey, Mr. 55 games started somewhere else and, didn't get it done when he was given the starting job and the keys of the franchise. Remember, the Panthers gave Sam Darnold $18 million fully guaranteed. They guaranteed that to him before he suited up a game for Carolina. So they committed to him that way. And he's now here. Come on. I can't buy the, hey, everything's happy with Trey Lance now.
Well, then then wait a second. Where did he disappoint them? I mean, did he disappoint them in a meeting? Did he disappoint them in the Chicago game? Did he disappoint them in the first drive of the Seattle game? I mean, exactly where did they decide to get off of the Trey Lance bandwagon? I personally think that Sam Darnold is fool's gold. I don't think Sam Darnold can beat out Trey Lance. I maybe I'll be wrong, but if you're asking me my professional opinion, I don't think Sam Darnold can beat out Trey Lance. I don't. So I don't know what I'm a little uneasy with the whole conversation because I don't really know what Sam Darnold and Brandon Allen are even doing here. To me, it's Brock's your one, Trey's your two, and the rest of this stuff just seems like it's hedge. But I don't get it because hedging off of what? You didn't like Trey's this or that. I feel like there doesn't it seem like, guys, there's a huge dramatic backstory that we're not privy to here, because otherwise, if it's just based on play, I'm not getting the presence of Darnold and Allen, other than you wound up with Josh Johnson and in the biggest game of the year, and God knows, you walked out of that stadium going, this can't happen again, and maybe that's why Darnold's here, maybe that's why Allen's here, but I other than that, I really don't get it. Darnold's been pretty bad. Allen's been worse. And I'm not exactly sure. I don't know why they went after those guys other than insurance policies, but I don't necessarily see what they see in either guy either.
Jesse, go ahead. This is there's a lot I want to hear from you on this.
No, I mean, I was basically going to say what you said. I think, I don't know when it happened. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the backstory is, but it is clear that if you were going to give a guy the number one position, that sure, Purdy coming in, playing well makes a ton of sense. I think I've tried to remain as consistent as possible on this, saying I understand, although I would give Trey Lance an opportunity because I want to see it through. And I think that the potential is extremely high. We haven't yet seen it. And it's totally fair to go with Brock Purdy that is a bit of a more known commodity, even though we don't fully know on him either, because you've seen it work and win on the field. Totally get that. Now, when you enter in the Sam Darnold conversation, that's where you lose me. The fact that if you did like Trey and you did believe in Trey, maybe you can't turn the whole team over because you don't have time and you need to see him develop and you need to see him play. Well, then that means every preseason rep that doesn't go to Brock Purdy, your starter, needs to go to Trey Lance so that he can get any ample time to learn on the job. Taking away one snap to go to Sam Darnold, who we've seen 56 starts of, that we started this whole show based on decision making, and we did it a little bit differently. But one of my top 5 traits, in fact, my second most important trait that I would say a quarterback has, is his decision making. If you are a poor decision maker, none of the other stuff matters. It doesn't matter. You can have an elite arm, you can have elite touch, you can make every throw, you can be extremely accurate, but if you're throwing it to the wrong place consistently, none of that matters. He's proven to be that guy in college. He's proven to be that guy in the NFL. And sure, in a world exists where Sam Darnold can be the best version of himself here, but that doesn't mean he's necessarily a better quarterback. It just means at this stop, with these weapons and this coach, he plays his best ball. It doesn't all of a sudden make him good. Why are we wasting any time on Sam Darnold? So the fact that they are tells me something went awry somewhere, regardless of whether it was Trey's fault, the team's fault. I don't know, but something is not the same as it was last year, clearly.
And that's the bottom line to me. It's less about I use the 55 games and washed out on 2 teams, not to insult Sam Darnold, but just to paint a greater picture of, hey, this is the guy who the team who traded 3 first-round picks for the quarterback is having him compete with, right? It's the kind of competition that you would expect the Jets to put Zach Wilson through, right? In the case that Sam Darnold didn't show up, right? It's the kind of competition that the Chicago Bears put Mitchell Trubisky into with Nick Foles, then with Nick Foles. And so it's that kind of competition. And we're talking about a player who Larry said, right, he hasn't necessarily failed. either yet. And to me, that's kind of the number one question of this offseason, because I feel like there's an equal commitment to Sam and Trey as raw kind of prospects in completely different ways. In Trey's, I feel like there's a commitment to him as a prospect because he's a complete unknown. But I don't find there to be a differentiation into the commitment in Sam either. I think they look at Sam as a highly talented prospect who's been, the old Chris Sims saying, if you're surrounded by crap, sometimes crap gets on you. And I think that's how they view Sam Darnold. And to me, it's like an equal opportunity. Well, Purdy's the starter, and now we have these two highly talented third overall picks with traits. And let's just let them duke it out and see if one of them figures it out over the course of the offseason. And that's kind of the part of the offseason that to me has not made sense, because from a total investment standpoint, to me, Trey should be here, and then Sam should be, well, if we revive him, whatever, but if we don't, whatever. You know what I mean? And it feels like right now they're here where they're in this competition. And if Sam ends up here, he's going to be the prospect that they try and groom. And maybe he ends up playing, and maybe who knows, right? Who knows what happens there, right? But it feels like, to me, unless it's this situation and one of them has to step on the field, you should be trying to get Trey Lance here, because you've seen 55 games and it's only here. With Trey Lance, 4 games, right? We don't know whether it's here, whether it's down there, but we just don't know. And so that's the part of the offseason that has me confused. But, I've mentioned I've confused about it every other show. Every other show, man.
It makes me think that, I don't know if you guys saw the Juszczyk interview with Rich Eisen, but he was talking about Purdy, and he's like, why Brock's so good is that he played so much at Iowa State. He played since freshman year. And he's like, you need those live reps. You need those live bullets. And that's how you get better. And so I kind of thought that would be the whole plan for Trey, is get him those live reps that he didn't have. Instead, you got other guys here. But it is possible, because there's one thing, we're not in the meetings. It's kind of like if you know a topic really, really well and you start talking about it with somebody who doesn't know the topic well, and they may ask an innocent question, but it's revealing of exactly what they don't know. That possibly is played out behind the scenes. Maybe Trey's asked questions that reveal that he's really a neophyte in this whole quarterbacking profession. Maybe. That's all I can say. And the other thing I'll say is, we as fans see errors of commission like 100 times more than errors of omission. Right. And what I mean by that is, there's plays to be had out there potentially, and Shanahan sees it all. And we're only seeing the errors of commission, the interceptions, the obvious mistakes. The reality is, Trey's played how many halves of football? And I believe it's not very many. What is it? He played 2 halves against Arizona. I think they didn't score hardly at all in either half. He played
he went for it on 4th down like 7 times in that game in field goal range.
He played the Houston game. I think they were getting shut out in the first half.
Yeah.
Didn't they score like 3 points in the first half against Houston? In the Bear game, didn't the offense produce like 3 points in the first half? So maybe Shanahan's looking at all of these, and then when it's not very many games, let's be honest about this, but maybe he's looking at this and seeing errors of omission that we're only seeing as just, hey, they didn't score points, but he's seeing errors.
I see an error of omission on Shanahan's part then, because I feel like it was a process that we all understood that you had to be married to if you were going to take this quarterback. Jesse knows, because Jesse and I went back and forth about Trey Lance, Justin Fields, all of this before the draft, right? My biggest issue with Trey Lance was timeline. I didn't see how the timeline worked with this roster. This is why I wanted Matthew Stafford, veteran quarterback. I didn't want to touch a rookie quarterback with this roster, because I like I mentioned with you, Krug, last week, I felt that if you're replacing Jimmy, a guy with that much equity within the locker room, the guy that comes in has to be immediately better than Jimmy. He has to show everybody that he's better than Jimmy. And when you get a guy who can be better than Jimmy, but right now it's a process in getting him better than Jimmy, it's hard to convince a team who's ready to win that you got to play out that process with the other guy. And so if there's a lacking of omission after 4 games, I would say the omission's on the part of the 49ers for not understanding the development that the player needed to go through. And if they did understand that, then they didn't understand where their roster was or where their team was at the time. And it was after they handed one-year deals because they got DJ Jones back in the mid-level exception because everybody was over the cap in COVID. They got K'Wan Williams back on a veteran minimum deal that offseason when nobody thought they could bring him back because everybody was over on COVID. Same thing with Jaquiski Tartt. They brought back 3 of what were classified to be priced out of their range veteran free agents on one-year deals. So they retransitioned a roster into a win-now team once again to run back 2019 after the 6-10 season in 2020. So when we talk about, well, commission, omission, then it's hard. Like, it's the same thing, Larry, and I know I've overtalked Jesse here, so I want to let Jesse go, but it's the same thing of we get back to, well, what was the process and the plan in taking the guy? And then if you pivoted off the plan, then you were never committed to the plan. And I don't think they were ever committed to the plan because the day before the draft, they phoned about Aaron Rodgers and tried worming themselves out of the plan. They didn't want to go through with it. They wanted Aaron Rodgers.
It's very possible.
Yeah, I got crushed for this a year or so ago in saying that I felt like the only plan the 49ers had was to replace Jimmy Garoppolo. But the actual plan, there was no actual plan. It was like, we're going to go after everybody that's not Jimmy, and that's good enough. Up to and including, like you said, the night before the draft, going after Aaron Rodgers. So because of that, what happened was, in my opinion, Kyle Shanahan fell in love with the thought of Trey Lance. He saw it happen with Allen. He saw it happen with Mahomes. He saw guys like Herbert come in. Yeah, come in and play well, Wentz, whatever. And he fell in love with that. He fell in love with the result, not necessarily the process. And when the process got a little bit different or tougher than what was probably expected, he was out. The first moment he could be. And I talk about it in, if you're trying to lose weight, everybody wants to lose weight. Everybody wants to be skinnier. Everybody pictures what it would look like if they could buy this dress or this shirt or wear these jeans or whatever. But nobody wants to go through the actual work to lose the weight. Everybody can dream of what it's like to be rich, but they don't go through the process to make it happen. That's what Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers, in my opinion, did with this situation. What they should have done, and I said it from day one, was start him day one. Get rid of Jimmy immediately, go straight to Trey Lance. And the only way that that decision was the right decision to play Jimmy Garoppolo over Trey Lance year one, week one, was the fact that they would have won the Super Bowl. That would have been the only way. They didn't win the Super Bowl. People said it was the right decision because, look, they made it to the NFC Championship. They were replacing a quarterback that went to the Super Bowl because they felt like he wasn't good enough. So why did we need to find out for a third time that Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't good enough? Why did they need to see it again? Because they had already replaced him. They made the mistake right away. He gets injured in year 2. Here we are. Hopefully Purdy works out. But the whole plan that they had, in my opinion, wasn't a plan. It was an afterthought. The only plan was to get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo. That was it.
Well, and also I'll add to that. Let me add to that, Jesse, because I also think that there wasn't a dialogue. I think the Niners really do a nice job of dialoguing with their team leaders, but I'm pretty convinced that there was no dialogue with, hey, we're going to start Jimmy, but we're going to utilize Trey in certain packages and this and that. So they go out week one. They tried that. They get down to the 5-yard line in that first season with Trey. Here comes Trey. Throws a touchdown pass, and I'm pretty convinced, and I don't have a source or anything. This is just from observing. I'm pretty convinced the veteran said, no, you are not doing that. You're not going to drive 95 yards with Garoppolo and pull him out at the 5 and have so your golden boy can come in here and you can make him look good. And I just think that if they had had that conversation up front with the players and they knew that wasn't a developmental option for Trey, maybe they wouldn't have gone with such a raw quarterback because that they clearly wanted to utilize him a certain way early, and they have just eradicated the plan after a week or two, and that delayed Trey's development to some degree as well, I would imagine, right?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think the point about the touchdown, that's really important, right? It's the second time really Shanahan has showed up Garoppolo on somewhat of a public way. There were 2 times that offseason, and then, of course, the infamous 6 for 8 in the NFC Championship game. That was a little bit of a show up. when Terry Bradshaw was sticking the mic in his face, like asking him after the game, hey, is your arm even tired? And he had to go through that. I look, this is a conspiracy theorist in me just going back to that, but I think if they wanted to get him to 15 throws, which would have made it look decent, they could have done it. But they didn't want to get him to 15 throws. They wanted to make sure that people knew why they won that game, who they won that game because of, and who they didn't win that game because they didn't. And honestly, this is just, again, this is deep end speculation, conspiracy theory. I think they kind of screwed Garoppolo going into that Super Bowl. For 2 weeks, all Garoppolo heard was why he was going to be the guy that was going to throw everything away for the Niners, right? Everybody said if the Niners are going to win the Super Bowl, they got to make him throw it 8 times again. And of course, what ended up happening, like right on cue. But even in that, earlier in that offseason, if you remember, they had that thing where Jesse brought up the quarterback competition earlier. The Chargers game, it was the tipping point. If you remember, the plan Tim Ryan and Greg Papa told us before the game was Garoppolo plays a series, Lance plays a series with the starters. They reinsert Garoppolo. Remember, that's what was supposed to happen in that order. Garoppolo's first series, he throws the 3rd and 15 interception off of Brandon Ayuk's hands. Always throwing the point. Coincides with Brandon Ayuk going into the doghouse. If you want to guess whose doghouse he's in, be my guess. I have a guess on whose doghouse he was in. It was Jimmy Garoppolo's. Besides the point. And my evidence, well, the year before, Dante Pettis, when he said every effing time versus Cleveland, that was kind of the end of Dante Pettis, had a pretty strong game. His only good game, non-rookie, against the Rams next week. And that was that. So that was my evidence for that. But, oh, holy crap. Holy tangent, man. Holy tangent. That's too much tangents even for me, man. That's too much. I'll get back to it. The point is, either way, they were supposed to do that, right? And Garoppolo never came back in. Lance didn't do too well with the starters anyway. Then they did that stupid 2-quarterback switch-up thing that Shanahan was like, oh, it was just all a game. Like, why did you do that in the 3rd preseason game against the Raiders? I have no clue. And then it all culminated with 2 things happened, right? The first drive of the season, Jimmy butt fumbles the snap from Alex Mack, excuse me. He doesn't catch the snap cleanly. They fumble. They start the season with the turnover. Then the next drive, they have an excellent drive, and they get to the 5-yard line, and Shanahan had basically, it's a schemed up touchdown. It was a touchdown to like pad up the stats, make the golden boy look good and all of that. And the team probably didn't go for it. And that's where I do think there's the biggest issue with the move, and I think Jesse touched on it, is one, it's Shanahan thinking prospectively rather than thinking about the process. But I think, 2, the biggest problem is I think Shanahan underestimated his power and his sway versus Jimmy's sway, if that makes sense. Like, I think Shanahan thought he could strong-arm the team the way Harbaugh strong-armed the team into believing in Kaepernick over Alex Smith 10 years ago. And he really couldn't do that because he reinserted an injured Garoppolo into that season 2 different times. He could have made the same, I talked about it on Twitter today, he could have made the same move in a different capacity that Harbaugh made with Colin Kaepernick in 2012 after Trey Lance played in that Texans game. He could have done it. He didn't do it. He went back to good old reliable Jimmy Garoppolo, who needed thumb surgery, needed shoulder surgery.
They hedged. I mean, this is what happens when you're trying to serve 2 masters at one time. You're trying. You knew you wanted a rookie quarterback or a quarterback on a rookie deal so you could keep Bosa and keep Ayuk and keep Debo and have this roster. But then you also wanted the players to go along with it. And I think they may have misgauged the popularity of Jimmy within their own room. And then it's like, hey, we don't want to go against the entire team. But they hedged. And if they had, I agree with the Mitchell and Ness. He said Lance, having Jimmy on the team the first 2 years, it felt awkward. It did feel awkward.
Absolutely.
They probably should have ripped off the scab. That, if you make an evaluation and move on. I mean, even now, they've made the evaluation that Brock's their guy. Jed said it. John said it. Kyle said it. But they still are in this, but then here's Trey, and then here comes Darnold. Here comes Brandon Allen, and we don't know, and who knows. And so, it's like, they've gotten kind of caught in between on a few of these, and it's burned them. And now they're in a real tough spot because now their window is starting to close. And I'm sure Dr. John and Jed are like, hey, it's time for us to win a Super Bowl. Kyle, right? Time for us to win a Super Bowl. And Kyle's like, yeah, there's no question. And that's why they're in on Brock so hard, because Brock happens to fit their current urgency and timeline. And I don't think anything's changed about Trey. And I think it's ironic. I think it's interesting that so many people are like, Trey's a bust. He's a bust. Come on. My God, we haven't even seen it yet. It's like seeing the opening credits to the movie. We haven't even seen the movie start, and you're already telling us it's the worst movie of all time. Can we see the freaking movie? You know what I mean? Seriously, maybe it sucks, but can I see the movie before you tell me it sucks? That's where I kind of feel like we're at. We're seeing the previews of future movies, and we're all sitting there with our popcorn, and we're being told that the main movie already sucks. And it's like, it may suck, but it may not. And I think we're the common sense that people have is saying, you know what, Brock is the better guy and he probably should play. But over here, to banish Trey or to sign him off as a bust is way premature. And it's just it assaults your sense of fairness. And that, at least for me. And so that's why they're in a weird spot now. I think we'd all not what this conversation is revealing to everybody is just kind of the weirdness of their current predicament.
And I want to say this too, and this is why I've tried to say it multiple times, and I'll say it again. The situation now with Brock Purdy and what they're doing, and Larry, you said they're in between again. Don't make the same mistake with Brock that you made with Trey. Like you've already made that mistake. If Trey's not the guy, that's fine. Let's move off of it and let's be done with it. But don't then also hedge with Brock Purdy. I think that is so unfair. If Brock Purdy's your guy, then go all in as if he's the guy. Do everything you can to instill confidence in him, that it's his job. Nobody else is here to take it. There's nothing that he can do to lose it. He is your guy, and move forward with that. Because if there is any doubt and he gets injured and somebody comes in and plays good, and now you're doing this back and forth and who should start when he's healthy, and all that's BS. Stop hedging. Choose a guy, move on with that guy, and let's just move forward. Be behind him. You got to be behind him. If he's your guy, be behind him. The one thing that frustrated me, and it was the strangest thing, as soon as Trey Lance was started, why was he not on every program? Why was there still outside of Levi Stadium? Why was there still a big poster of Jimmy Garoppolo when Trey Lance was the new guy in town?
Yeah.
Those little things send messages. You don't think these players see that? You don't think they're smart enough to read through that and be like, well, that's kind of weird. Like, I'm walking into the stadium. I was just picked number 3 to replace that 40-foot poster of that guy. Why is that not me? You don't think that psychologically that doesn't play games? All that stuff. Purdy should be on every program. He should be on every poster. He should be on every promo. If he's your guy, get rid of all the other people that could potentially be the guy and move forward with them, period.
So 2 more things on this topic. Then I want to read the super chats and get us all out of here. Thank you, everybody, for supporting. Make sure you're subscribed on all 3 channels. We had a lot of people in here today. This was awesome conversation. Shout out to both you, Larry and Jesse. Now, so the first thing is in terms of committing to Trey Lance, I have a conspiracy theory that I just thought of. I want to run it by both of you. Then I have a second point on why I think Purdy's the exact kind of guy that they like. I think part of their affinity for him is that they can hedge with him because of his draft status and all of that. He always has to be the guy that has to overcome something. And then I'll get to the super chat. So the thing I have as a conspiracy theory, if you remember before the draft, what was the infamous line in the angry Kyle Shanahan presser? When asked if Jimmy Garoppolo would be on the team the next year, he said, I can't guarantee if anybody will be alive, right? It was a pretty rude thing to say about a player who had just taken them to the Super Bowl as the starting quarterback a couple years ago. After the draft, if you remember, Shanahan did 2 things. One, he apologized for saying that. He said he never wanted to come across saying that about Jimmy or talking that way about Jimmy. But then 2, he completely had changed his tune on Jimmy Garoppolo. Before the draft, Shanahan was adamant. Why did you make the move, Kyle? Well, we evaluated our team. We felt we needed a starting quarterback. Huh? Why do you think we made that move, right? That was his answer for all of it. It was an aggressive. It was, we made the move because we needed a starting quarterback. The moment they drafted Trey Lance, what did he say? Well, we have a starting quarterback on our roster. Well, we have a guy, that's kind of hard to beat out and all of that. I wonder if when he gave that presser and he said that about Jimmy Garoppolo, a lot of people were like, yo, why'd you say that about him? What the fuck, Kyle? Why'd you say that? And I wonder if moving off of Jimmy in that moment became that much more difficult because they felt like if they moved off of Jimmy, the team would feel like they disrespected Jimmy and they might have lost the room right there. I wonder. Just watching that entire 180 flip happen, I wonder. Last thing on Brock Purdy in regards to the kind of guy they can hedge, I think they like that about him. I think they like the fact that he's a 7th-round pick and he's very underpaid because I think they can do these kinds of things with their quarterback. One thing they have shown as an organization, and I think it's a Shanahan thing, is they don't put the quarterback really on a pedestal. They make him a part of the team. They want the quarterback to operate right. They don't give the quarterback as much attention as other teams. They don't market the quarterback as other teams. They want the quarterback to be part of their team. And I think it plays into their stars, right? The Niners tight end is talked about more than other tight ends. Why? Because he doesn't have a quarterback stealing attention from him. The Niners wide receivers, Debo and Ayuk, are talked about more than other wide receivers. Why? The quarterback's not stealing attention from them. Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, these guys, we talk about these guys as superstars because the quarterback doesn't steal attention from them. Jimmy Garoppolo played that role of not taking attention away from the team, but being a cog in the system and still being a leader perfectly. That's not a role that the number 3 overall pick that you spent 3 first-round picks to, because you've already put him on a pedestal. Once you gave him that, once you use that, he's already on a pedestal. He can't be this version of a cog in the system and a guy. I think that's what they missed out on. They need their quarterback to play a specific role. They don't want to highlight it. I think Brock plays right into that because at the end of the day, he's small in stature and he didn't have lofty draft expectations. So therefore, even if you bring in a Sam Darnold, even if you bring in this guy and bring in that guy, nobody's going to say, hey, why are you doing Brock Purdy wrong that way? And Brock Purdy's not going to be like, well, I deserve to start. You know, I was the number 3 overall pick. You brought me in with the intention of making me the starter because he's earned every strike. He earned his way onto the roster. He earned his way as the backup. He earned his way to play. Like everything for Brock Purdy has been an earning process. And so I think from that standpoint, will they do the same mistake to Brock Purdy? I think they absolutely will. But I think it also is a better reason why he's their kind of guy because they can do this to him and he can put up with it because they did it to Jimmy and Jimmy was the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. And they did it to Trey after 3 first-round picks. With Brock, there's no pedestal there.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, I personally think that they wanted 2 things, and Brock checks both boxes. They wanted a quarterback on a rookie deal so they could surround him with a ton of talent. He checks that box. And they wanted a quarterback who could make plays late in the down and have escapability like Mahomes has, like Josh Allen has. And Jimmy wasn't that guy. And Brock has proven that he is that guy. I mean, Brock may have better escapability than Lance. Lance might be the bigger, stronger athlete, but Brock's got that 1.54 10-yard split. And when you watch him play, if there's one thing about his game that is surprising, it's that. It's that you can see him escape rushers and show a little bit of like what I call kind of high-end scoot. You know, he can get away and make plays late in the down and extend plays. And I think they saw that in Mahomes. They saw that in Josh Allen. And they said, give us some of that. And then they also said, hey, I want that quarterback on the rookie deal. And now Brock just checks both boxes. And as far as how they're handling Trey now, I think it's a little bit of save face. Like everybody knows what they invested. And I don't think they want to throw him out there and have it revealed that he's super raw and not ready to play because it comes across like a quick, obvious deduction that, hey, they failed in their evaluation. I think they're being a little guarded of him and maybe a little guarded of themselves with how they handle him at this point. But I think the real commitment was to the 2 things I mentioned. Quarterback on the rookie deal, quarterback who can make plays off schedule. Brock checks both boxes. They're all in on Brock.
Can I ask you guys a question real quick before we go to Jesse?
Yeah.
Because that point that Larry just made of they don't want to put him out there unless it looks a certain type of way. If we have another, 20 minutes on the show, I have another deeper thing that we can talk about to that.
Jesse's in the Eastern time zone.
There. Jesse, it's up to you. I'm going to let you rebut to Larry. Maybe I should read these poor donations. I'm the worst producer / host / whatever. I haven't been reading them, but oh my God, this one's juicy, Jesse. You will love this one. This is pig in a pickle right here. This is what Larry goes.
It's midnight Eastern.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm fine with it. I do want to touch on something that Larry said, and this is not against anything that Larry said, because I don't think he made this point, but it reminded me that a lot of people have started to kind of make this point and have total revisionist history. We were talking about all the steps that they took to go here, and how they potentially made mistakes, and how they should have turned the team over to Lance right away, and all those things. A lot of people, when Shanahan and the team came out and said, hey, the whole thing here is we like the cheap rookie quarterback. Everybody's like, yeah, see, that's why they drafted Trey Lance. That's the only reason, you know, that they traded up to 3, and they thought he could be the guy, and he was on an inexpensive contract, and now they got that in Purdy. That was not the plan.
No.
Again, every plan up to that point was Matt Stafford, Deshaun Watson, and then Aaron Rodgers. None of which were cheap. None were inexpensive. They were all proven. They were all very good.
By the way, all of which who have signed historic quarterback contracts since they were traded, right?
Exactly.
Stafford got a historic contract. Watson did. Rodgers did as well.
Exactly. And they were willing to pay out the wazoo for any of those guys and didn't care. So the plan has not always been, but this is what can be frustrating about being a fan of the 49ers, or even being a content creator, is you start to call out some of those fallacies, and everybody's like, no, I mean, you just got to buy into what they're telling you, because they buy into everything that's being told to you. No, that was not the plan when they drafted Trey Lance. That's not why they drafted Trey Lance. Just like the injury thing is not the only reason they moved on from Jimmy Garoppolo. Right. They moved on from Jimmy Garoppolo, yes, due to injury, but also because he wasn't good enough. They knew he wasn't good enough. Right. They took the ball out of his hands all playoff run. Then they saw it exposed again in the Super Bowl. They knew he wasn't good enough. Then you compound that with injury. The inexpensive quarterback was never the thing. It was just moving on from Jimmy Garoppolo. So all this revisionist history of, oh, well, now, see, I mean, Brock Purdy's cheap, Trey Lance is cheap, they redeemed themselves. That's all that it is. It's all revisionist history. That was not the plan ever. And this is the first offseason we've heard of this said plan that they want the inexpensive quarterback.
Right. It's their pivot, right? It's their sell of what happened. We were successful, so let's just sell what's happened as, well, we kind of had a plan, and it didn't work to our plan, but we had this vision. Let me get the super chats, and then, you know what? For Jesse, you're not going to bed early tonight. Larry, you're in the West Coast. It's 9 o'clock. It's breezing hour for you. We're hitting my theory, and then we're getting off. Let me get these super chats in. Cless Limpero, and by the way, this was donated maybe an hour and a half ago, so shame on Vish. But he says, "What a lineup! I just got here. Hopefully you were here for the last hour and 30 minutes, Cless. Thank you so much. Badass. I agree. I'm surrounded by 2 badasses here." Penith. One seat says
sketch
one
name.
seat. One
Great. That's an awesome name.
Right. Yes. Awesome. Sure. If you're the one, nice of you, Larry. If you were the one reading it, you wouldn't say awesome. Okay. But he says 1 seed is so important, which is why Purdy's your guy, but not ready week 1. I can't see them risking losing early games with Trey this year. I'm not going to repeat your name, but I think we've covered that maybe quite a bit throughout this show. Flav, this genius Flav, look at this brilliant guy, says he agrees with Vish. What a brilliant guy. He says he agrees with Vish. Eagles will be dropped. What a
This was like an hour ago.
A brilliant take, right? Yeah, no, I'm joking. But he says Dallas will be good. I think the Lions will be tough. I think the Saints will be really good. I'm not in on the Saints. I like Atlanta or Carolina in that division.
I thought Derek Carr was with the Saints.
He is.
Oh, okay. Just making sure.
Yeah. That's why we're not. No, I'm kidding. I like Derek. I don't know if I like Derek Carr. I'm okay with Derek Carr. Nees says maybe they'll actually flag Lane Johnson this year. No, they won't. Nees, that's not going to happen. He's
easily the greatest left tackle of all time because he's allowed to false start. That's not a false start, really. The
gaslighting that went on during the playoffs with that false start BS was hilarious to me. I'm like, what do
it
you
was
mean?
unbelievable to me. It was like, it is a false start, but he's allowed to do it because of the way he moves into position. So I was like, yeah, we agree it's a false start. And it's like, dude, I don't care. That is one of the greatest right tackles in NFL history, even though he had a PED suspension. By the way, he's one of the greatest right tackles in NFL history, and he was the third tackle drafted in his draft. Eric Fisher and Luke Jokel were taken over him. Kind of crazy. One of the greatest right tackles in NFL history. He can jump false start every other game. Every time you play Dallas, let him jump. I don't care. Just don't let him do it against the Niners. What's up with that?
Amazing.
Greg T says, what do you think about the team travel from coast to coast? How that amount of travel is going to affect the win-loss record? Great question.
Greg, I think this is one of the more interesting articles I read this whole offseason. I got to go back and reread it. And guys, you remember it. It was it maybe 6-8 weeks ago where somebody came out with the article about total rest days, right? And it came out that like the Jets have a rest advantage in like 14 different games this year. And the Bears have like a rest advantage in none. And it makes you look at, to me, it's like it's a chart that everybody who wagers on the NFL should have at their side at all times. Because there was a game, and I got to go back and look at my notes, but there's a game that I had down as a win for the Niners. But when I went back and factored in this rest advantage thing, I'm like, there's no chance the Niners win that game. The Niners are playing like on a short week, traveling across country from a road game to like another road game. And the team they're playing is like 13 days off and a huge rest advantage. And I forget which game it is, but I got to find it because the Niners are probably going to lose that game, So that rest advantage in your schedule, I mean, the league, that's the league's ability to kind of manufacture a built-in advantage. And if you think it means nothing, I'd push back on that, because if you talk to coaches, I mean, the reason the Niners stay back east is to try to negate this rest disadvantage concept. Coaches believe in it wholeheartedly. If you have even one extra day of rest, you feel like you've got a huge advantage. And if you have one less day, you feel like you're at a huge disadvantage. So when you start making 2, 3, 4 extra days more of rest advantage, it absolutely is a factor, and it needs to be kind of studied week to week to see exactly where you are against your next opponent.
I think last year's schedule, we identified pretty early that from the Chiefs game on, it was going to be pretty easy as far as a travel perspective. And it was no surprise that they went on this giant winning streak essentially right after that, because the advantage was clearly there. They stayed in the West Coast time zone for the rest of the season, and that was a huge deal. And so when you look at it this year and it's completely opposite, I mean, who knows how it's going to play, but it's definitely not ideal. I think that was a great comment.
I agree. Shout out to Greg T. By the way, I'm going to preface, I have a funny thing to say about this comment, but I'll read it first. Shout out to Flav again for donating. He says, it's weird people actually think Kyle wanted Trey when they begged for Rodgers the night before the draft. Kyle never wanted him and has treated him since day one, despite what he said. All right. Thank you, Flav. Shout out to you for the donation. We also did cover that topic. Now, what I did want to say before I get into my theory that's funny about that is, Flav, I've seen you donate the same $10 to make that comment on like 7 different shows, dude. Just donate that $10 to me to make that comment. I promise I'll read it, dude. Come on. Like, if you want that comment to be read so much, like, come on, man. What about me? Come on. I got to pay the bills here. Move it. No, I'm joking. That's
Did he just gave that to you right there?
That was you, Larry. 11 p.m. That's why I got on him.
Are you sure? I thought that was for you.
Oh.
There's no paperclip there.
Well,
that was for you, Vish.
I guess I'm misunderstood. Shout out to you. No, all joking aside, appreciate every one of you that donates. You don't have to. It means a lot to us. We appreciate the support. Like and subscribe to all 3 channels. Now let's get into theory and let's get out of here. So Larry, I thought, brought up a great point of why Kyle isn't willing to take that risk with Lance. And I think we have to go on a little bit of a history lesson here and talk about what happened to his dad in Denver. And I tweeted this out, a few days ago. Just to have it on record mostly. I know the two of you established earlier in the show that you don't use Twitter, so I'll rehash it for you. So his dad's last 4 years in Denver are very important to me. Now, let's remember, before his dad's last 4 years in Denver, he had built an equity where, he had, 7 years in Denver. He had already been there at that point. No, he had been there for 8 years at that point. And, he had won 2 Super Bowls. Fantastic, right? 2 Super Bowls, great record. He goes 13-3 in 2005 with Jake Plummer under center. That year, they beat New England in the divisional round. I think they blew him out. They beat him like 27-10. That was the year Belichick came into the locker room after and talked to Shanahan about his run game, because they killed him in that playoff game, Brady and Belichick. And then they ended up losing to the Steelers team that beat Seattle in the Super Bowl with the Hines Ward from Antoine Randall, Willie Parker, 75-yard touchdown run. Big Ben not scoring a touchdown to this day, nobody cares about, but the ball never crossed the plane. Only his head did. It matters. It does matter, people. It still matters to me. I'm sorry, but that was not a touchdown. So they lost in that Super Bowl, right? The subsequent year, his dad makes the bold move to trade up for a quarterback. Now, I've read some articles later that apparently his dad wanted Matt Leinart with the pick, and there was the president or somebody who wanted Jay Cutler. And when Matt Leinart went 10, his dad was pissed, but they still traded up because somebody else wanted Jay Cutler within the organization. Either way, Mike Shanahan was in charge of everything in Denver at that point. So let's attribute Jay Cutler completely to him, and let's say that he drafted Jay Cutler. The next year, they were 7-4 with Jake Plummer playing middle. At that point, Shanahan benches Jake Plummer, plays rookie Jay Cutler. They finished the season, I want to say, let me give you the exact how they finished the season. They finished the season, by the way, they traded a 1 and a 3 for Cutler, just for reference, 1 and a 3 for Cutler. They finished the season 9-7 and didn't make the playoffs. So remember, they were 7-4 with Jake Plummer. They went 2-3 with Jay Cutler, and they didn't make the playoffs. By the way, from a pure statistical standpoint, Cutler completely outperformed Plummer in every single metric. So I want to include that for the sake of argument. You could make the argument that he made the completely right decision. Now, the very next year, right? So he's made an NFC championship game, and now he's barely missed the playoffs. The very next year, they go all the way with Cutler, right? They commit to the plan. They commit to the plan of developing Cutler. They go 7-9. Cutler has somewhat of an up and down year, but okay, this is what happens when you're developing a quarterback, right? Then finally, in 2008, the year Shanahan gets fired, they start 8-5. They finish the season 8-8, and they miss the playoffs. Shanahan gets fired. Now, the interesting thing about this season is Cutler actually gets developed in this season. He makes the Pro Bowl. He throws for 4,500 yards, which was third in the NFL at the time. 4,500 yards in 2000, and I think that was 8, is a lot of yards. I think only Breeze had thrown for, it was before Manning, Breeze, and Brady all started throwing for 5,000, Stafford, all of that. It was only Breeze at the time that had reached that mark. So 4,500 yards, a very impressive number. Cutler is a Pro Bowler, and guess what happens? He gets a new coach, a young offensive genius in Josh McDaniels, who trades him, and Mike Shanahan, the coach that won 2 Super Bowls in Denver, the guy who just developed Jay Cutler, what happened to him? He got fired. And to me, where this comes full circle is Kyle goes on the Flying Coach podcast with Sean McVay and Peter Schrager in 2021. When he goes on that podcast, they get into a long topic, which was news to us at the time. That was fresh news, that Shanahan originally did not want the 49ers job. He didn't want the 49ers job because they were 32nd in defense, 32nd in offense at the time, right? They had both of those 2 issues, and they didn't have a quarterback. And there's a quote, and I direct quoted it from Kyle on that podcast. And he says, and he references dad's career. This is why this is important to me. He says, my goal was to become a head coach and stay a head coach. I didn't write it in, but what he says right after that is, I didn't want to just become a head coach and get there. I wanted to become a head coach and stay a head coach. And his point was, he had learned from watching his dad's career that the only way to stay a head coach in the NFL is if you have a great quarterback, because then you can go through the ups and downs and you can survive a 7-9 season. You can survive an 8-8 season. His dad, even with 2 Super Bowls on his resume, could not survive the back-to-back 7-9 and 8-8 season. By the way, Thomas says Marino threw for 5K. I know Marino threw for 5K in '84. I'm referencing when the new age quarterbacks started crossing that barrier over and over again. In 2011, I think Stafford, Brady, Breeze threw for 5,000. I think Manning in 2013 threw for 5,000. So there's been Mahomes threw for 5,018. So that threshold has been crossed like 8 times over since then. So, but his dad got fired right after the 2 Super Bowls. Going back to this, his dad got fired, and so the kind of the where this all climaxes to me is, remember, Kyle said last year that they considered replacing Garoppolo with Lance after the Arizona game going into the Indianapolis game. What happened to Trey Lance was he had an MCL strain. Then the Niners ultimately dropped to 3-5, and what happened? Who came to practice out of nowhere? It was a big deal. Kyle Juszczyk said he noticed it. John York came to practice. Now, when John York comes to practice, Jesse, and Larry, my interpretation of that situation is, hey, Kyle, who's had 3 out of 4 losing seasons, he's 3-5 right now. We are trending towards another losing season. John York is there to put some pressure and light some urgency under the asses of Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. And at that point, what did he do? He didn't do what his dad did, which was bench Jake Plummer and let's start developing the quarterback and see where it goes. He went right back to the veteran. And to me, part of his reluctancy to go with Trey Lance is, and this sounds crazy because I think a lot of us think Kyle Shanahan has 100% job security. But I think at the time, if he had started with Lance in 2021 and he had a losing season with Lance in 21 and he had a losing season with Lance in 22 or something like that, something like what happened to his dad with Jay Cutler, I think Lance would have gotten a new coach before Shanahan would have gotten a new quarterback. And now in this case, by working it out, Shanahan has gotten a new quarterback before Lance has gotten a new coach. That is deep conspiracy theory for you guys. Past midnight, Jesse's enjoying July 7th out in the East Coast. Me and Larry are still enjoying July 6th. But that is deep historical parallels. And when he says, I saw what happened to my dad's career, and I heard that, and I remember he said that on the podcast, that was the ultimate warning sign to me that he saw his dad develop a quarterback, turn him into a Pro Bowl, and get fired for doing it because he didn't win enough games. And he wasn't going to sacrifice going through losing seasons developing a quarterback because that could end in him losing his job.
I'm going to poke a hole in that just real quick.
Oh, man, come on, man. I just went on for like 7 minutes and you're going to poke a hole?
Not necessarily in your theory, because I don't necessarily believe that you're wrong in that thinking, but Kyle Shanahan shot himself in the foot at the State of the Union this year because they asked him, and in fact, they didn't ask him. They were asking John Lynch a question. I forget how exactly it went, but they were talking to John Lynch and Jed York. And I think Jed York had said something, and then Kyle goes, hold on, and butts in and says, I just want to make it clear that even though, it could seem like from the outside that there's a lot of pressure and all these other things, I've always felt like not only are we on the same page, but there was never that pressure to go out and perform. I always felt like I had everything I needed to make the decision that I wanted in the moment, and I always felt like I had the backing no matter what. So he offered that up without a question being asked to him. So regardless of what actually may have happened, or even if that theory is right, he took that theory and threw it right in the garbage. And now I basically what I'm saying is he doesn't deserve to be given this long leash and say, hey, it's all good that you just, potentially passed up on Trey Lance and didn't develop him and do all those things, because he himself said he never felt any pressure.
Larry?
Well, I mean,
Great point.
we can twist and turn and, look at it a bunch of different ways. The reality is we would all agree on one thing. The team that he inherited was not very good.
Agree.
And they won 10 games combined in his first 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they lost 22. So it wasn't, they're 10-22 2 years in. And then since that point, they've been to 3 of the last 4 NFC championship games. And 13 wins, 10 wins, 13 wins. In between, there was the 6-10 season in 2020 where they had record number of injuries. And they unfortunately, Trey Lance came along, at a point when, they drafted Trey Lance at a point where they really needed to start to win. You don't get forever in the NFL. So you got a couple passes in the first couple years. Then you get to a Super Bowl in year 3. I think everybody would admit in 2019, the Niners were ahead of schedule. But now they're not. Now they've been to the last 2 NFC championship games. Right. Now there's some pressure. And so they enter 2023 with, I'm sure, Dr. John and Jed going, hey, we like what we've seen in comparison to the coaches that preceded you, but it's time for us to win a Super Bowl. Right. I mean, this is the San Francisco 49ers. We judge ourselves by Super Bowl wins. So I think there is some pressure. And that's what I've been saying this entire offseason, that I think Brock is their best option, but it's really more about they feel urgency to not just win a division or make it to the playoffs. They've done that. And I don't even think this year would be a successful year if they made it to the NFC Championship game. They have to make it to the Super Bowl, and deep down, they got to win it. And so they're just going with Brock, I think, now because they feel like Brock gives them the best opportunity. And as far as Trey and his development, I think so they're clearly not going to clear a path for him. Do they want him to develop? Yeah. They don't want to give him away because they kind of fear that he'll be really good on the back end. And they're going with Brock because it's time to win, and they're feeling some urgency. I don't think it's totally, I don't think it's totally an accurate statement to say that there's no pressure. It's the NFL. There's always some pressure. And then you're the head coach of the 49ers. Right. They judge themselves with Super Bowls. So there is real pressure here. But he just doesn't want to speak it into existence. Right. So because there's no advantage in doing that. So he's just going with his most polished quarterback that he thinks he can win with now. And they're just kind of kicking the Trey Lance can down the road and seeing where he is. And I'm not sure if they know how much he'll develop or won't develop. And they don't want to trade off of him because they fear that what they liked about him will come to fruition somewhere else. So I think that's kind of where they're at. And then as far as these other guys, I think the other guys are here because of the scar tissue of watching Josh Johnson for 3 quarters. I think that's why Darnold's here. I think that's why Allen's here. It's just because, oh my God, that can't happen again. And that's how I see it. I think all the Darnold talk, starting talk, is probably bogus. I just think it's just, we're not handing Trey anything. Anything he gets, he will earn. And Brock's the guy they're going with. That's how I'd sum this thing up. Brock's the guy they're going with because he fits the urgency to win now. And he's the guy who's most ready to win now. They would move off of Trey if they had a real conviction that he wasn't the guy, but they don't. They would probably make him the unquestioned number 2 if they had a real conviction that he was the guy, but they don't. And the other guys are there just for insurance. That's how I see it.
I think 2023 can be explained pretty easily. It's more 2021 and, last year and all the weird things that happened leading up. I think this year is pretty clear cut. And that's why I was saying, they have to have Purdy healthy, know who the quarterback is, and just roll that way. That's their best chance at getting the number 1 seed. It's more the development of Trey Lance and what went into it up to this point is where I think the issue is. Now, none of it matters if Brock Purdy turns out to be the guy, or even if he doesn't turn out to be the guy, but they win a Super Bowl, who cares? The ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl. So however they get there, whether it's Purdy, Lance, Josh Johnson, I don't know, Zach Wilson, I don't care. That's the ultimate goal. So if they win a Super Bowl, then win a Super Bowl. That's what it comes down to. And so none of that will matter. But, in 3 years, if they don't win a Super Bowl, Purdy ends up not being the guy and Shanahan's not here, this whole regime and all the feel goods about the NFC Championship and how great it is in 3 or 4 years will be given a golf clap at a ceremony at halftime that nobody gives a shit about, just like they did with Harbaugh. So they better win it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, I got to say, guys, okay, well, first I have to say something that's more serious. One, I have to give a shout out to the coach. He was the one who originally put me on the Mike Shanahan, Jay Cutler leading to him getting fired parallel, which drew me down the rabbit hole to come up with this beautiful theory, which brings me to my second point, which I have to say, the lack of enthusiasm for that theory, I'm so disappointed in the two. I spent 7 minutes giving you guys stories about 2006 and 2007. I was 7 years old.
I do have to say this.
It was late in the show. It was late in the show. If you went with it earlier, I would have given you more.
Yeah, you might have. But I have to say this, and it's super impressive. So hopefully you don't take offense to this, but it might come across that way. So I apologize.
No worries at all. Say as you please.
Vish, you're the Rain Man of 49er content. The most obscure random stat from 2007 from X wide receiver. You remember the craziest things. It's so hilarious to me. You always off the top of your head. Well, I remember this sequence. They had lost to the Colts, and then he went for 137 yards on 6 catches. But really, this had happened. I was like, geez, dude, how do you remember all of that? It's crazy.
Dude, I mean, I will take it as a compliment, and I appreciate you saying that. I just really love football, man. I love it. Since I was a kid, number one hobby. Parents never would let me play, for obvious reasons. I think they made the right decision there. But yeah, I've read many books. I've told Larry about how I used to read the old Joel Boschbaum draft books and
the late Joel Bushbaum.
Right.
And not only that, I didn't let my kid play freshman football either until I said to him, man, I go, tell me why you want to play. He starts going into a conversation about girls, and I'm like, that's it. You can't play football for girls. You have to play football because you like to play football. And if you really want to do it, you're going to have to lift weights for a year. I made him lift weights. He went from flat chest to, a little bit of muscle. And then basically it was like, all right, I got to let him play. I kicked the can down the road, and then I said, all right, you got to lift. Then when he did it, I'm like, all right, you can play. Is
this new 49ers media sensation Kevin Krueger?
Yes.
Okay.
He was a very good corner for Northgate High School and receiver.
What'd you think about him? Put on your scouting hat. No, I'm joking. I'm not
seriously. My wife is fast, and she was a runner, and my kids or my older boys are very fast because of her. So
did you tell him that if he wears instead of because football players usually wear their jerseys big because they want to get him off the shoulder pads, you should have showed a picture of you in the Wilt Chamberlain jersey.
Yeah,
and be like, hey, if you were an extra small, this is how you really get the ladies.
I said to him, hey, if you want to play football because you want to play football, you can do it. But it was one of those things where I was going to lose my relationship with my son if I didn't let him play. It was like, Dad, I need to play. I'm going to play. I want to play. And I'd already pushed him off for a year, and I'm like, you're right. All right. But it was very enjoyable to watch him play, but I'm kind of glad that my other kids have chosen not to play.
Guys, this is the most fun I think I've had doing this stream in forever. Those 2 hour 22 minutes went by like that, and we talked about so many different things. I appreciate both of you for your time. This was awesome. Jesse, what do you have coming on this week? And please let everybody know where they can like and subscribe, and tell them what you got coming up next as well.
Yeah, just come over to Last Second Sports. Actually, Vish and I have a weekly show that will be coming out when the season rolls up. So looking forward to that. And I have to highlight this comment from Brother Bob. He said, Larry would trade Kevin Krueger. I think that's hilarious. That's a really, really funny comment.
Krug, what's the deal on that? Look at
By the way,
I missed this super chat from Flav. Shout out to him for the 4th time. He says, love you, Vish. Oh, that's so kind. And look at that 3 periods. I'm teaching. Come on. But when Larry, comma myself, look at this, and a few others were talking about Purdy in preseason, you were laughing at us. Larry's the GOAT. You're up there too. Hey, I appreciate that you're up there too. There's no doubt Larry's the GOAT.
No.
And I wouldn't say I was laughing. I was giving, if I remember, I think I comped him to Colt McCoy. I think where the laughing started, and this is where I was completely wrong and I have to eat my L, is because Larry said one of the most prophetic things to me at the time. And this is the one I was like, Krug, no way. You're crazy. What are you talking about? He said he thinks, and this was before the Purdy hype even started, that Purdy and Lance would be amidst a quarterback battle for the starting job this offseason. He said that, and I was like, Krug, what is this? And Flav, you're right. Krug is the GOAT. He saw it coming. Look at that.
No. Blind luck. Blind luck. I will say this. Tune in tomorrow on the Krueg Show. We're trying to get to 20,000 subs. We're getting closer. We're trying to get there before training camp. We're about 300 away before training camp. Hammer's going to stop by tomorrow. And then I'm going to do a little post-game Giants tomorrow night with the great Ned Coletti after Giants Rockies. And then Coach stops by on the show Saturday morning. He's been on fire the last 2 Saturday mornings. So tune in Saturday morning at 8 West Coast, 11 East Coast.
All right. I think West Coast 57257 made the executive decision. Make sure you guys go tune into Larry's channel for all those different shows he's got upcoming. Make sure you're liked and subscribed here. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, this was an awesome show. Thank you to Larry and Jesse, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.